c'est l'heure. Hello to all. I think that probably we can begin. So I would like to say good morning or good evening in function of the place you are in the world. Thank you to all the participants here for the webinar concerning the French paradox 2022, and it is a birthday, in fact, of the publication of Serge Renaud on the Lancet that everybody know concerning the French paradox. And so this was a unique occasion, probably a unique possibility for this 30 year to do something for Serge, the work he has done, but also for all the work that has spread because of him, because he was working so much and generating a network and a lot of research project. And so this webinar, in fact, is a webinar that the first idea, I was contacted by Raúl Pastor, our colleague that is a medical doctor in the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, saying that it should be a very good idea to do something. And immediately I agree with him as president of the Commission Safety and Health of the OIV. And I was contacting the OIV to say that if it's possible, we can try to do something. And so, of course, the general director and the colleagues of the OIV, Jean-Claude RUF, Barbara Iazello, were okay. The network Innovity International also was interested in the webinar, as they have as there is a group, in fact, of wine and health, a working group on wine and health, directed by Eva Fernandez. And so we were thinking to have this short meeting of it's around 2.5–3 hours, and it was not easy to find, of course, the right time, because of course we cannot speak to all the world at the same moment. So that's the reason that the meeting is recorded. I want really to thank all the panelists for the acceptation to do some presentation about the work in the frame of the French paradox. I want to thank more particularly the General Director Paul Roca for acceptation, the OIV, Jean-Claude RUF, of course, and all the colleagues, Kurt ElLLISON from United States, but also Dominique LANZMANN, of course, from Paris, Professor De Gaetano from Italy, Professor Dominique DELMAS from Dijon, the Professor Valérie SCHINI from the University of Strasbourg, the Dr. Raúl Pastor from Buenos Aires, Professor Ramón from Barcelona, and also Rosa Lamuela, that is also professor in Barcelona. We have also Dr. Victoria Moreno, that initially was previous for speaking. Unfortunately, she has a COVID and she will not be able to join us, unfortunately, and we wish her, of course, that she can recover quickly. So thanks to all again for this event, and so I let the word to Jean-Claude to say also some welcome in the behalf of the OIV, of course. Thank you to all.
Thank you, Pierre-Louis. Thank you, everybody, and good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First of all, I would like to apologize the General Director of the OIV, Mr. Paul Roca, who had other commitments and who asked me to represent him and welcome you to this symposium. When we discuss the organization of these events with Raúl Pastor and Pierre-Louis TEISSEDRE, as he mentioned previously, the OIV has immediately wanted to respond by co-organizing this event. Some word for the OIV. As you know, the OIV is an intergovernmental organization bringing together 48 member states, actually, and is very attentive to the issue on responsible wine consumption. Through its international experts, the Safety and Health Commission of the OIV, chaired by Pierre-Louis TEISSEDRE, works on various aspects on epidemiological and biological studies, but also on behavioral aspects. I will come back this issue on my presentation today. As scientific director of the OIV, I am delighted with this initiative, which also affect me personally and which bring back many memories. As you know, and some of you well know, a long time ago, I joined Serge Renaud laboratory for my PhD in Lyon. And I was at his side in 1991 when the article on the French Paradoja is published and in the Lancet. And also what was my surprise to see the CNN's 60-minute team led by Morley Surfer arrive at the Lyon laboratory. And you can see my back screen and some. I think that Kurt and also have a good memory on that. It's obvious that today the aspect of the specificity of the wine suffer from a lack of research today compared to a few years ago. Public research does not invest in this theme, and research found by the wine sector is most often subject to criticism because of its type of funding. It is a vicious circle that today leaves a lot of room for uncertainty and controversy on this topic. And finally today, I'm delighted that many scientists who have participated since the beginning in the research of the responsible consumption of wine and health have been able to respond positively to our invitation. So I wish you an excellent day and a fruitful symposium, and thank you for your attention, and thank you also for the panelists to give some scientific speech. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude. And so we can begin the webinar. And so the opening is for me to one of the great world epidemiologists on the topic. It's Professor Kurt ElLLISON from the University of Boston in United States. And so I will share the slide because it's very early, of course, in Boston. And so thank you very much again, Kurt, for giving the talk and opening this webinar.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Perfect.
Very good. All right. I'm from Boston, as you can see, and the International Scientific Forum on Alcohol Research. What I will do this morning is very briefly give you some background material that led to the current research on wine and health. Next slide, please. Throughout history and into the 19th century, wine and alcohol were used by physicians for many medical conditions, and frequent articles in the literature, especially in the Lancet, described many, many diseases. In fact, children with acute rheumatic fever were given very high levels of alcohol, were kept inebriated for several days trying to block the inflammatory disease, but there were really no well-done studies to justify such treatments. Next. Next slide, please.
Alors, s'il est bloqué. Voilà.
By the early 20th century in the US, alcohol abuse had become a major and disruptive problem for working class men in the US. And their wives and other women who had just won the right to vote started a crusade to stop the evils of alcohol. This is in 1918, 1920. Next slide. One of the leading American humorists said, when I read about the evils of alcohol, I immediately gave up reading. Next slide, please. Nevertheless, the campaigns led to a new constitutional amendment in 1920, stating that it was illegal to sell or serve alcoholic beverages, and millions of barrels of beer and wine and whiskey were emptied down the drain. However, the crime syndicates had a field day because they were importing it illegally, smuggling it into the country. And if you had the money, you could drink all the wine you wanted to, but officially it was illegal. Prohibition was finally voted out in 1933. Next slide. Almost all publications up to now have been about the adverse health effects of alcohol. I just looking over there, three exceptions I found was in the first century, the Apostle Paul, drink no longer water, but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake and thine other infirmities. Pearl and his colleagues in 1926 reported that in a study of subjects with tuberculosis, it was reported that moderate drinkers live longer than the abstainers. No one paid much attention to this. But I did find one really good trial, an experiment by Clearfield and Krzyzewski. They put rabbits on a very high-fat diet, and they developed coronary lesions from atherosclerosis. If the diet was given with water, the risk was 100%. Every coronary lesion, every rabbit developed coronary lesions. However, if they were given spirits, the risk was reduced to 87%. And if given red wine, the risk was only 40%. So we do have data coming back from before all of this started, suggesting that indeed there may be some beneficial effects. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Yes, sorry.
Now, the next step that brought the interest of potential beneficial effects of moderate drinking were from the 70s, when prospective epidemiologic studies, starting especially with Arthur Klatsky and his colleagues in the Kaiser Permanente study in California, they began to note that during follow-up, their subjects who are moderate drinkers had a much lower risk of myocardial infarction than did abstainers. Next slide, please. In the 1980s, I began to work at the Framingham Heart Study, and I came across a 1974 manuscript in the files there on the risk of myocardial infarction in men over the period of 24 years of follow-up in that study. That study was started back in 1948, 1950, and so they had 24 years of follow-up. I had never seen this publication, nor had anyone else. Next. Here's the table. It's showing across the top the alcohol consumption in drinks per day for non-smokers and for heavy smokers, and it's presenting the percent deaths over the first 24 years in men. And you'll notice that if the alcohol consumption was none, non-smokers, 16.3% died over the first 24 years, 28.3% died if you were a heavy smoker. But if you look to the right, and you'll see once you begin having one drink or more, 2 drinks or so per day, for a non-smoker, the risk was cut in half. If you're a heavy smoker who did not drink alcohol, the 28.3% dropped to around 12, 13, 14, or 15. So very striking reduction in the risk of death if the subjects, when they were smokers or not smokers, consumed some alcohol. Next slide. And that manuscript contained in the same table, this table was in, it concluded that there were 4 major risk factors for coronary heart disease. high blood cholesterol, high blood pressure, cigarette smoking, and abstinence from alcohol. Now, the NIH, National Institute of Health officials, they have to approve all publication of the Framingham study, and they blocked the publication of this paper in 1974. Next slide. They sent the message saying, refer to only 3 major risk factors, remove all references to alcohol. With all the abuse in this country, we must not say that alcohol prevents coronary heart disease. And then they added, if you must comment on alcohol, say there's no effect. I mean, this is, this is lies coming from the government. We were a little familiar with that now that we were then. Other scientists have begun to see the same protective things. And so the message got across in any way. Next slide, please. In 1979 was this very important paper from St. Leger, Cochrane, and Moore, published in the Lancet. And if you know, on the vertical axis is the mortality among men per thousand from coronary heart disease. And on the horizontal is the wine consumption in each country. And you'll notice that the lowest wine consumption was in Finland, Scotland, the USA, and so forth, which had the highest death rates from coronary heart disease. Over on the right, the highest intake of wine was in Italy and France had by far the lowest risk of coronary heart disease deaths. Next slide, please. The next thing that stimulated interest in this was an In Health magazine article describing and naming the French paradox. But other scientists did not accept the potential mechanism of wine being an important part. They said it's not due to the wine, it's due to something else. And there were a series of articles that came out. Next slide, please. Next. And these were actually publications that say the French actually do not eat a high-fat diet, so therefore they shouldn't get heart disease anyway. And then others said they eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and high folate intake is a protective factor. But the most interesting and ridiculous one, I think, is that the eating patterns differ, which is true. But they said the meals are a stressor in the US, but a pleasure in France. And if you eat a high-fat meal and you're happy with it, it doesn't cause heart disease. There's no data to support that. And then there are very negative, the French can't diagnose coronary disease. You know, if a man drops dead, his liver got him. They can't even count right. Some of the Brits were saying, un, deux, trois, get lost. And one of the people said, you can't trust a nation of winos. In fact, you've seen the slide of the French army knife. Next slide. However, the World Health Organization started the Monaco study, and they made the same criteria and the same investigations in 20 or more countries. And you'll notice that France indeed had the lowest rates, 79 for men, 13 for women, even lower than Spain, Italy, and you can see that it's less than half the risk in the USA, and Finland is 1/5. So indeed, we do know that there's less coronary heart disease in France. Next slide. Now, I became interested in the French paradox after reading the articles and hearing about seeing the Monaco studies, and started searching for a French scientist. I had to really look to find anyone who was studying heart disease in France. Luckily, I heard about and located the leading French scientist, who was Serge Renaud, and he was working in Lyon, and that he had been working on this for years. And actually, our next speaker, Dr. LANZMANN-PETITHORY, will be discussing some of his work, extremely important work in this field. Next slide. I met with Serge, and we prepared a major application to NIH to identify key lifestyle factors: diet, drinking, exercise, smoking, a large number of factors in 5 cohorts in different countries. seeking to explain the rates. However, when our application was received by NIH prior to its review by a study section, the study section was told by NIH staff this grant application from ElLLISON and from Renaud should not be approved, as it might show that alcohol is good for your health, and this is not a message that the NIH wants to spread. Next slide. Luckily, there's an American journalist, Morley Safer, who is one of the leaders of the 60 Minutes program that is a very popular program in America, and he heard about it. Next slide. A little background on this because, next slide, please. Because Morley, he lives in Connecticut. His estate is next to that of Jacques Pepin, the French chef. And returning from his family vacation in Provence each summer, Morley complained to Pepin that he was sure he was going to have a heart attack right away after all the wine and high-fat foods, the cheese, the butter, the foie gras that he'd been eating in France. And Jacques said, "Don't worry, Morley, the French do not have heart attacks. They're much less common in France than in the US." Morley got interested. He called around and was referred to me and telephoned me. He said, "Is this true or not?" And this was at a time that Serge and I were planning a working session in Lyon. So 60 Minutes, and Morley said, "Let's bring a team over so that we can tape a segment on this subject while you're working down the grant." Next slide. On November 17th, 1991, Morley described the striking lower rates of heart disease among the French, filming them eating and enjoying their high-fat foods. When I asked what led to these low rates, Serge replied that the regular consumption of wine with meals may be playing an important role, but this is what we're trying to study. But Safer ended up holding a glass of red wine and saying to the American public, "The protection of the French from heart disease may be in this inviting glass." Next slide. Americans went crazy. There are 20 million viewers, and they had the largest response to this segment for any show on 60 Minutes. And US sales of red wine increased by 40% in 1 week and have continued. And it became acceptable to talk about both the beneficial and the harmful effects of alcohol. Next slide. Now, the first slide I showed you that the rates of France having such low rates in 1979, but that's been 40 years ago. So luckily, next slide, they did another ranking of 183 countries in 2020. And you'll notice that I've just listed some high risk. You've got Russia and Belarus, and actually Ukraine is high. There's a middle area. And if you look down to the left, the lower risk, the USA and Finland, who were very high, have lowered their risk. And they are now 73 for the US and 59 for Finland. But look in the bottom right corner, the lowest risk, France. France had the lowest risk again. So we've got 40 years apart, and both of them show the same thing. Next slide. So why is this? If you look at deaths, France still has the lowest rates for both men and women. If you look at risk factors, France has values similar to the US for cholesterol and hypertension, and even higher rates for smoking. And so scientists cannot fully explain the low rates of France from the usual risk factors. Next slide. Is there still a French paradox? I think we know after 40 years, there is still a French paradox, but the potential reasons are unclear, but that's what today's meeting is. And so starting with Dr. Renaud, starting with Dr. Dominique LANZMANN, we're going to be hearing some of the reasons and some of the data that Serge Renaud contributed to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kurt. So it's wonderful to see how all the story was advancing, and well, it's always a pleasure to see how you fight to arrive to have the scientific result really on for everybody, so that it can be distributed for everybody. So thank you very much. Now I think that it's to Jean-Claude to present Dominique.
Yes, thank you, Pierre-Louis. So the next speaker is Dr. Dominique LANZMANN. She's a medical doctor who worked with Serge Renaud for several years on the question of the French paradox, and she has published different papers on this topic, and also especially on the cancer. And Dominique, I am very happy that you could participate to this symposium, and I give you the floor.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry, not with the good one. The good one is here. Sorry. Yes.
Very nice to be with you today. And I would like to thank Pierre-Louis and even Raúl Pastor, who contacted me last year already for this date today. Alors, my presentation, for those rare who would not know Serge Renaud, I will try to summarize in about 10 minutes his exceptional life path, French and Canadian, and the series of observations, work, and deductions that led him to the explanatory hypothesis of the French paradox. Yes, it is important to know that Serge Renaud was born in a wine region north of Bordeaux, the Blayais, and both his grandfathers had vineyards. Here you can see Serge's maternal grandfather bringing the horse and buggy with the round wooden crates. All the vineyard owners in these regions at this time were very poor. But that did not stop Serge early on from naturally knowing what was healthy eating habits, fruits, vegetables, and some wine with water, even for children. Since he was the only son, his destiny was that he would eventually take over the vineyards. Incidentally, his father was also in the same position and refused that destiny of hard work and poverty. During the war, his father placed Serge at a prestigious high school in Bordeaux, where he made friends with children of doctors who became his friends for life. After war, he had a severe motor accident, lost time, started medical studies, and his cousin Ramón proposed him to leave for Canada to earn money as a lumberjack to pay for his studies. Here in 1951, you can see Serge searching in the forest to determine the next trees to be cut down. And he said, when I left France at the age of 24, I couldn't imagine there was a population in the world that did not drink wine with meal. Alors, the first surprise for Serge was that surprised him was the frequency of myocardial infarction by young hockey players in Quebec, who in theory share the same genes as French ones. And in France, there were almost no cardiovascular disease in Southwest at this time, in the 50s. Alors, Serge thought that it should be an environmental factor that had to be responsible, as it was no gene. And maybe the enormous difference in eating habits, that is to say, no fruits, few vegetables, lots of saturated fatty acids, and no wine. And at this time, he decided to study nutrition And the university told him, in order to study nutrition, he had to become a veterinarian. After finishing his training, he being awarded the VMD degree in 1957 in Montreal. You can see him, he was first in his class, and he decided to devote himself entirely to research. He did his first training period in research in Hans Selye laboratory. Selye, the father of stress. Here is the first scientific paper of Serge in 1957. And voilà. His following 12 scientific papers were published from 57 to 59 with Hans Selye, but Serge wanted to pursue his research on nutrition rather than stress to explain coronary heart disease, because he was sure that diet was a key factor in the development of coronary heart disease. Then he decided to leave Selye laboratory to go to Cardiology Institute of Montreal to do some sectioning. And then he made a third decisive observation that the young hockey player who died from myocardial infarction had healthy arteries, but clogged with blood clots, thrombosis. This decision to further investigate this phenomenon was going to take up the next 40 years of his life. He was awarded a PhD degree in experimental medicine and surgery in 1960, and started to realize that thrombosis was the main culprit in myocardial infarction, based especially on his observations of autopsy material. Here you can see Serge removing blood in rat to evaluate platelet reactivity in the Department of Experimental Pathology at the Montreal Heart Institute. And he realized that such thrombosis was independent on cholesterol levels, 30 years ahead of his time. He became head of the Laboratory of Experimental Pathology for 13 years, Montreal Heart Institute. And Serge Renaud was a great researcher, and as a veterinarian with his experience on stress, he insisted always on the fact that animals should be perfectly treated in perfect and stable condition without stress. If not, you cannot have reliable results, he said. With decades ahead of other researchers, he found the protective effects of aspirin, of platelet activity, and the increased activity of blood clotting with feminine hormones. You see in 73, it is a subject of actuality. At present, I would like to share that it is not by accident that Serge Renaud discovered all he did, because he was a man with a lot of the right qualities and somewhat of a Renaissance man. He was very handy, able to disassemble and assemble a car's motor, as well as the motor of his Harley Davidson. And that's what allowed him to develop a very original method of research on platelet reactivity in humans. He launched a mobile laboratory that he built himself, you can see, to be able to reach rural populations of different countries to compare under perfect conditions platelet reactivity in relation to dietary habits. Here, the trailer laboratory in Lyon, leaving for a field work to evaluate platelet reactivity. in relation to diet. Alors, here you can see inside the caravan, the two technicians are on the left side, you see platelet aggregation, and on the right side, coagulation study, both using a coagulophotoaggregometer connected with a recorder. Analysis of platelet activity could be made immediately in the caravan, which is essential to follow in real time the activity of the platelet that begins immediately after blood retrieval. Here you can see the extremely sensitive aggregometer Serge designed to evaluate platelet reactivity, but it was never commercialized because too sensitive and required very meticulous technician. But he could make interesting study with this aggregometer, and the first study in farmers from France suggested that platelet reactivity, but not lipemia, could explain the higher coronary heart disease mortality in Moselle compared with the south of France. Here are some examples of elegant paper he published in atherosclerosis, in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and also in Lancet in the 80s. Now, here, this slide summarizes 40 years of work on the factors that influence platelet reactivity, factors that increase saturated fat, omega-6, age, smoking, hormones, and factors that decrease platelet activity, alpha-linolenic acid, omega-3, polyphenols, alcohol, calcium, and acetyl salicylic acid. Yes, he then developed his famous intervention trial, but it is not the subject today. With the platelet activity modifying diet, the Lion Diet Heart trial, and obtained a 73 decrease of myocardial infarction and 70 decrease of all causes mortality. But now I will be very fast because Kurt told the story. This is the first mention of French paradox by a French epidemiologist in 81 in a cohort in Paris, Enquête prospective parisienne, who observed the particularity épidémiologique de la maladie des coronaires, high risk factor and low incidence. And then the paper in the Edward Oldnick that Kurt mentioned, and this paper intrigued American journalists and scientists, as Kurt told us. Alors, I go fast because we saw that. And French paradox, here is a definition in the Lancet paper. Compared to US and UK, despite the same or higher level of risk factor, cholesterol, blood pressure, smoking, saturated fat, France has a low mortality from coronary heart disease. And today it is still more strong because before Japan was still lower, but today, as Kurt showed us, France is a gold medal in low coronary heart disease mortality. And here are some Serge slides, similar to those of Saint-Léger and Cochrane, but 12 years later, the same aspect. Alors, you see with alcohol, the relation is weak, but with wine, it is more strong. Yes, Serge, a quick word. 20 years ago, Serge launched a vast epidemiological population follow-up study with the Center for Preventive Medicine in Nancy. He was able to gather 100,000 subjects over a 20-25 period. It was the first study in France to have demonstrated that the moderate consumption of alcohol, particularly wine, was associated with a 40% in cardiovascular mortality. This study was prolonged under the form of a program financed by a public grant on wine and cancer. I will tell you in the end that today I was on pitch for personal reasons the last 10 years to publish the data of this study, but I would like to do it now. Alors, we saw that French paradox is still true today. We can no more make this kind of maps on the WHO site. It is less practical today. It was a slide because I follow every year, to every occasion. Here it was in Davis, and it was the first time that France had the lowest before Japan. You see, here is not, it is total cardiovascular mortality. But it is the same result with ischemic heart disease. And here is the kind of map that we can have today. It is less beautiful, but France is the lowest today. And tobacco use, you see in the last WHO report that we are higher than the other country, much higher in tobacco use. And also an interesting comparison. Yes, show that the French eat more saturated fat than American, and also that in France wine accompanies the meal, whereas in US alcoholic beverages are not necessarily associated with meal time and may be consumed as part of between meal snacks. Okay, cholesterol. Well, this for blood pressure too. You see that we are higher than US and UK. Alors, French paradox is more true than ever after 30 years. It is a robust observation, and moderate intake of wine might be an important factor. And the other hypothesis in the different articles, less sugar, less soda, more garlic and onions, small size of servings, less snacking, meal sitting structure, more physical activity, but wine seems a serious candidate. Alors, I finish with picture. I like the picture because scientific meetings are always good souvenir, and here are a souvenir of Serge in California, with Kurt, Arthur Klatsky, and Morten Grönbeck. Here is Serge and Kurt in Carcan-Plage in 2005. And here is Serge and Kurt in Walla Walla in 2009 with Ted Goldfinger, who launched the Renaud Society. And yes, Serge was also celebrated in the most famous wine confrérie here in the Burgundy, here in Bordeaux, and here the Renaud Society. And here is to show you the grave of Serge near his two grandfathers, both are in the same cemetery. And here I translate for you what is written on the plaque. Thank you for having restored their pride to the winemaker. Voilà, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for your nice talk and all the story concerning the work of Serge and the life of Serge. So it's very interesting to see how much he was working and bringing so many data results, and how it is very important to continue the work, in fact. Thank you, Dominique. I think that we can continue with Dr. RUF. Jean-Claude RUF will present some elements concerning the wine consumption and health, especially from the YV. And so, Jean-Claude, I let you the floor.
Thank you, Pierre-Louis. Thank you so much. And very brief, I would like to share, first of all, share my screen. and also to present to you some to give you some inputs on the works on wine and health conducted by the OIV. And in this slide, we can distinguish four types of action. The first one concerns the effect of wine consumption on health, and especially on the research on the effect of moderate and responsible wine consumption. I think it's important also to mention the responsible wine consumption and health. Some article has been published in peer-reviewed journal by some OIV experts in different subjects, and this subject concern mainly a cancer review, but also the papers related to the effect of wine consumption on diabetes, and also the effect of grape and derivative on the cognitive function, and also the grape derivative and product associated to cardiovascular disease. And also some publication has been made on the bioavailability of the wine-derived polyphenol in humans. The second type of action, concerns the consumer behavior, because we know, and the OIV is very engaged on the works on the identification and analysis of the trends and key factors in consumption behavior. Some article also has been published in peer-reviewed journal, also by OIV experts, and mainly on the dietary and lifestyle habits. There is a systematic review of the evidences that have been published in 2021, and also on the drinking patterns with on the effect of health, wine consumption, and also with meals. I think you know that it's very important that the wine consumption should be taken into account in the global diet. In parallel, and as already mentioned, we are intergovernmental organization, so we are working for the member states, for the states. We have developed some resolutions, some recommendation for the member states, a recommendation mainly for the research on wine and grape juice consumption and its positive and negative consequences for human health. It concerns the effect of grape, but also for the wine consumption, and also on the research. The third type of action concerns the education, and one of the objectives of the OIV is also to facilitate wine consumer to make informed decisions about their consumption. And in this case, the OIV has developed some educational program, some with different resolution, and concerning the wine, alcohol, and society, and healthy lifestyle and behavior, but also guidelines for prevention of the risk and the development of standardized methodology of voluntary breath analysis tests. It's some resolution to set up some good guidelines and good practices. And finally, the fourth action concerns the health policy. Also the main objective of the OIV and the objective of the Safety and Health Commission at the OIV is to monitor policy landscape at national as well as international developments. And we have published some expertise document on the comparison of internal alcohol drinking guidelines, which is published in the OIV website, and it's could be downloaded for free. And also an important part of the work of the OIV is the cooperation with WHO, and mainly for the headquarters in Geneva, to accomplish the global action alcohol action plan for 2022-2030. And I just inform you that this global alcohol action plan has been just adopted by the World Health Assembly in last May, and the idea is to strengthen the implementation of the global strategy to reduce the harmful use of alcohol. So for the OIV, it's very important to discuss and to cooperate with WHO in the light of the effect of alcohol consumption in general, but wine consumption in all the effect to reduce the harmful use of alcohol, but also to evaluate the potential beneficial effect of wine consumption. So with that, I just finished my presentation, and it's a very short overview of the OIV work, but I think the OIV is very happy to see this symposium, and also to see the progress of the research on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude. And so we should continue.
We should continue, Pierre-Louis, with your presentation.
Okay.
And Pierre-Louis TEISSEDRE is well known to all of us, of course. He is professor at the Grape and Wine Institute in Bordeaux, and he's the author of numerous publications on the effect of wine consumption on health. He is also currently the president of the Safety and Health Commission of the OIV, and it's too long to present you, Pierre-Louis, so maybe the best is that you introduce your speech.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude, and so I will try to not be too long. In fact, I just would like to summarize a little bit and to show you some elements concerning the actual data, or some elements concerning the deaths. You can see, for example, here that you have the leading cause of death globally from 2000 to 2019. And there is, of course, evolution, especially for ischemic heart disease, that is around 16% since 2000. And it's the largest increase in deaths, in fact, rising by more than 2 million to 8.9 million deaths in 2019, in fact. So this number, this figure
in India.
Yeah, so it's very, very important. You have also stroke and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease that are second and third leading cause of death, 11% and 6% of total deaths respectively. There is death also from what it's called non-communicable disease that are on rise, trachea, bronchus, and lung cancer deaths that risen from 1.2 million to 1.8 million, and that are now ranked 6 among leading cause of death. In 2019, you have also Alzheimer's disease and other form of dementia that was ranked as the 7th leading cause of death. And so a woman is disproportionately affected. Globally, 65% of deaths from Alzheimer's and other form of dementia are women, actually. And diabetes also has entered the top 10 cause of death, following a significant percentage increase of 70% since 2000. And diabetes is also responsible for the larger rise in mild deaths among the top 10, with an increase of 80% since 2000. So you can see that there is really some evolution there on the world cause of death. And another data that I wanted to show you, of course, you have here all the share of total disease burden by cause. You have them in 2009, but also you can see it only for European Union in 2009. And in fact, in the world, so cardiovascular disease are the first one with 13.43% in 2009. You have an increase, in fact, at 15.52% in 2019 for cardiovascular disease. And so in Europa, there is an evolution. In fact, you can see that cancer is at the same level than cardiovascular disease, around 19.6%. But this was in 2009. But in 2019, in fact, you can see that there is a small decrease for cardiovascular disease in Europa with only 18.9%, and a little increase in cancer that is around 20%. There is also an increase for mental disorder and also increase for diabetes and kidney disease that appear in 2019. So there is some evolution, and probably there is differences around the world and around the country. So probably environmental factors are very important there. Alors, to summarize, and I just want to remember you about the specific years. In 1978, Arthur Klasky was finding the famous G curve. In 1981, Richard Camien du Cimetière evoked French paradox, but Serge and Kurt finally, because Kurt was also in the CBS TV show, and so it was a vulgarization of the French paradox finally with CBS. Morten Grønbæk, that was doing the famous Danish study, confirmed also the data finally in 1995, and then we had some new opportunity in terms of thematic with Jean-Marc Orgogozo that passed away unfortunately last year. And so it was in 1997, he shows that there is favorable effect on neurodegenerative disease. So finally, two basic concepts of the French paradox are challenged for modern epidemiology. So French people do not die less and do not eat too badly. And so nevertheless, the stimulating idea of Serge Renaud prime a large number of studies on complex relationship between alcohol intake and health. And the epidemiological evidence today have confirmed that protection brought about moderate alcohol intake expands the area of protection behind cardiovascular disease to degenerative disease, from neurodegeneration to bone loss. And so remarkably, also the risk deaths for all causes decrease. So this is a fact. So you have some also data concerning intellectual and functional aging, especially the famous PAC-8 cohort with in Gironde, especially with the Orgogozo team. And he showed, for example, that significant association between the wine consumption and cognitive performance, with a moderate initial wine consumption that was correlated to 5 times less risk of initial dementia at 3 years. And the same relation was found with Alzheimer's disease. And so finally, the risk of dementia was significantly decreased. You can see here the relative risk to 0.55 for subjects consuming more flavonoid in their diet. And so you can see that Jean-Marc Orgogozo was working also with Serge Renaud. He is also inside the publication here with the Bordeaux team. You have this meta-analysis of wine consumption, but I will not speak about it because there is Professor De Gaetano that will be able to show. And so, in fact, for adults, there is a moderate consumption of wine that is associated generally with cardiovascular disease reduction risk of 30–40% generally. And also for the cancer, you have also some meta-analysis showing that finally light drinkers have a 9% lower risk of cancer, moderate consumer no effect, and so of course heavy and excessive consumer increased risk of cancer by 31%. This was published already in 2013 in Annals of Oncology. So you can see some of these data that are very important. And one point that I want to show you is also concerning, of course, new data, especially I want just to change of slide because I have new elements that are of interest here. Yes, the point is that we should think about, it is not shared. Let's see now. Yes, now it's working, sorry. So you can see here the more year-free of chronic disease and the life expectancy. It's also a very important issue, a very important point, life expectancy. And so you have, for example, recently in 2020, a paper that was published in British Medical Journal from Harvard University that extensively examines the relationship between several lifestyle factors and life expectancy without major disease, and confirms this some recommendation following a healthy lifestyle in midlife that is associated with longer life expectancy and the lower risk of major disease such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. And so this study highlights, in fact, 5 specific lifestyle factors that is of which is reduced consumption of alcoholic beverages, but these factors are never smoked, normal body weight between 18.5 to around 25, moderate to vigorous physical activity, moderate consumption of alcoholic beverages. You can see that their recommendation are women between 5 to 15 grams a day and men between 15 to 30 grams a day. And so the wine brings alcohol, but also probably other compounds of interest there. And so a balanced nutritional diet. And this is also interesting in terms of evolution and research. You can see here the quantity of phenols that you can find in wine. So, of course, red wine is richest than dry white wine. You can see, for example, that you are around 2.2 grams of phenol by liter of red wine in average. And so you have for the white wine only around 400 milligrams by liter. This is at least 5 times less. And so for sweet white wine, for example, you have a little increase around 600 milligrams by liter. So you have, because of the technology and of course the botrytization of the wine, of the preparation, the evolution of the berry, in fact, a concentration also effect. So the wine contains alcohol, and I know that we talk a lot about alcohol, but wine is not just alcohol. There is a lot of other compounds that are very important, especially for antioxidant defense, in fact. And so we have enzymatic antioxidant defense, like superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione peroxidase, or transferase. But we have also non-enzymatic one with vitamin E, vitamin A, E, C. And so this can be brought especially with food, vegetable, fruits. For example, phenolic compounds that are in the grapes, but also, of course, in the wine and in some of the vegetable. Then and selenium and glutathione also, that is very interesting for antioxidant defense. And so all these compounds, in fact, fight against oxidative stress. It's coming from free radical production, and you obtain at the end oxidative pathology. Why? Because you have lipid peroxidation, protein oxidation, nucleic acid alteration. And so all these antioxidant defense reinforce, in fact, our potential to fight against free radical production when they are too much, in fact, in terms of concentration. Some work we have initiated when I was in postdoc in United States in 1993 in the Professor Andy Waterhouse lab. In fact, this work, we were talking with Professor Serge Renaud. I remember it was in 1993, and it was in San Francisco, and Andy Waterhouse bring me to a conference that was in fact on the Mediterranean diet. And Serge explained already the French paradox, his idea about it. And so he asked us to look for the phenol and the activity of phenol. And we did this work with Andy Waterhouse team and Professor Edwin Frankel. And you can see here, for example, the monomer of tannins, catechin, epicatechin, but also, of course, the oligomer, dimer, trimer. So the inhibition of the lipoprotein, low density lipoprotein, in fact. And so you can see that all these compounds, almost at the same concentration, are more powerful in terms of antioxidant activities than vitamin E. And that was a very important element for us to continue the work, for example. So what are the work actually that are developed in the Health and FC Commission? We have a lot of working group, and I want to thank Barbara Iasello, that is the head of unit for the work she did with Jean-Claude, that was also head of unit before her. And of course, all the experts of the YV concerning assessment of epidemiological design. It's a very important issue because a lot of papers are published, but not all the results are maybe the good one or reliable for communication. And so we are performing some work about it. We have also wine consumption among adolescents, another one concerning wine grape derivative consumption and immune system with coordination of alcoholic from Italy. Wine polyphenol effect on health. It's important to see what are the compounds able to act. A special focus on resveratrol, because resveratrol has developed a lot of work. An all-cause mortality and wine consumption. This is also an important issue. Why? Because we know that in the past, it was shown that drinking wine decrease finally all-cause mortality when it is, of course, in moderation in some study. And we would like to know, to have an update, because this was already 10, 15 years ago. And so we have also a guideline on drinking alcohol and health warning labels. That is a very important issue. It was a very big debate in European Union some months ago. In terms of wine and health research, there is a lot of initiative and potential area. We need update on wine consumption and chronic disease and the different type of chronic disease, cancer, arteriosclerosis, of course, diabetes. And so we need epidemiology, clinical and biological studies there. We need also probably some novelty in the future with nutrigenomic and personalized nutrition, wine and diet modulation on gut microbiome or in brain, notably. A guide to wine consumption guideline, maybe we should try to do something. We should try to encourage biodiversity, friendly practice for sustainable diet globally with agriculture. And so I just want to remember all of us that well-being is also a part of the health definition. How wine can participate there. So there is consideration, development, integration in policy and public health to see. And so probably also a recognition of wine as a product that to be associated, integrated as part of the nutrition, food lifestyle. And at the end, of course, scientific integrity. It's a very important issue there because we need to comment the results, but to not show the result or is not the good way. We need to say the truth, and the truth depends on the data. And so all of us need to try to apply scientific integrity. It's a very important issue there. So finally, wine can play a nutritional preventive role if it is integrated in diet with moderate consumption. phenolic compounds from grapes and wine have therapeutical interest for cardiovascular disease, but also from chronic disease. There is some research needed on wine effect consumption, on chronic pathology and health. And we need also, it's very important, funders of new research projects on wine and health effect in the nutrition area. The source of funding actually are not so many important. And I take the occasion of this symposium to say that we should try to organize ourselves to find new funders to advance also on this topic. And so finally, I want to say thank you, Serge, because finally he is one of the father of finally all of us somewhere, especially on this thematic, as he has developed a lot of data, a lot of projects, a lot of conclusion, a lot of communication, and so a lot have to do again, and we need to update, we need to advance. And so thank you, Serge, for all you did. If you go to the link that I put here, you can see the 60-minute TV show with Serge and also Kurt, where you can see how it was presented, the data and the discussion. And so thank you to all of us. Voilà, thank you, Jean-Claude.
Thank you, Pierre-Louis.
Alors, I try to change of document. And so I think that we can, should we have question now, Jean-Claude, or we wait after Professor De Gaetano presentation?
Maybe after Giovanni.
Okay. 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 So let's go for Professor Giovani De Gaetano that will talk about wine and health, past and recent study epidemiology. Giovanni is a very famous epidemiologist, well known all around the world with Kurt. And so thank you, Giovanni, to be there and to show us also the work you are doing in your team. Thank you very much. I give you the floor. We cannot hear you, Giovanni. Can you hear? Can you reactivate the?
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes. Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. And you see my slides?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. So thank you, Jean-Pierre, again for your invitation to this symposium. And want to recall that Maria Benedetta, my wife, and myself, we met Serge Renaud in 1972 in Montreal. And we were looking for models of experimental thrombosis, and showed us a model in rat fed very diet rich in fats and injected with endotoxin. And I must say that I never saw let me say, a beautiful thrombosis in the liver as in that model. At the time, neither Serge nor ourselves were interested in wine, but I want to recall that many years ago, I met Serge Renaud as a scientist, as an investigator. So these are my conflict of interest. I am a member of an international scientific forum run by Kurt ElLLISON. I was a correspondent. I was a consultant of the newsletter of Assobirra in Italy, and a member of the Accademia Italiana della Vite e del Vino. The evidence deriving from observational studies and meta-analysis on the relationship between moderate wine or alcohol consumption and cardiovascular outcomes is quite rich. Here you see a number of clinical outcomes which are favorably modified, protected by moderate alcohol consumption. Myocardial infarction, heart failure, peripheral artery disease, abdominal aortic aneurysm, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, ischemic stroke, cardiovascular mortality, and all-cause mortality. These two last endpoints are very important because I think that people would like to live longer, independently of the cause of disease and the cause of death. So the all-cause mortality in our studies have been always considered as a very important endpoint. Simona Costanzo and myself, we presented a praise of the J-curve some years ago in the Journal of the American College of Cardiologists, and compared the curves of smoking and of alcohol consumption. And you can see very clearly the well-known J-curve of alcohol consumption, but the cigarette smoking also showed an increase of risk by increasing the number of cigarettes per day. But there was no protection. If you smoke 2 or 3 cigarettes, you are not protected. But if you drink 5-10 grams of alcohol per day, you are protected. And it is well known. And if you continue to drink, the protection is lost and the harm appears. The question which is debated in the current literature is, does the J-curve depict a real relationship between alcohol consumption and mortality or other clinical outcomes? The problems of studies on wine and alcohol are problems not specific, not necessarily specific, but are problems common to observational studies. And I have listed here some of the most important of these methodological problems. The first one is the problem of confounding, when confounding is not controlled. Really, the first studies, the first epidemiological studies on wine and alcohol and health did not take too much attention to this problem. But today, at least in our hands, the problem of confounding is taken very seriously. And we try to eliminate all possible confounding from the analysis we perform. There has been also, but this is also much less frequent now in modern epidemiological studies, the so-called sequitur phenomenon. A problem is still debated whether the control in the study should be lifetime abstainers or occasional drinkers, because former drinkers included many times people who were sick by themselves, let's say for liver cirrhosis. And so the protective effect of wine or alcohol could be not to be true or really true because of the sequitur phenomenon. The epidemiological studies, observational, use questionnaire for taking the information about alcohol consumption. I will mention in a few minutes the problem of underreporting, which is a very important one, but it is a problem which finally play in favor of a favorable effect of alcohol on health problems. And also, I don't insist on other problems, but I will try to show how to manage these methodological problems. The J-curve exists, but should be qualified. This is an example in the Castelnuovo paper, which has been quoted more than 1,000 times. The J-curve shows that both in women and in men, moderate alcohol consumption protects, but there is a difference. The protection is lost at 2 drinks per day in women, but only at 4 drinks per day in men. The difference between men and women in relation to alcohol is important, but the more recent epidemiological studies tend to eliminate or to reduce the importance of this difference. Another example, the J-curve is to be qualified in relation to the clinical endpoint. You see here 3 examples: fatal, non-fatal cardiovascular events, cardiovascular mortality, or total mortality. The J-curve is always depicted. However, you see that the area, the favorable area, before we lose the protective effect of alcohol, changes in respect to the endpoint. It is clear, it should be clear that the total mortality includes suicide, car accidents, and so many endpoints which have often nothing to do with alcohol. So the protective effect of alcohol on total mortality exists, is shown as a J-curve, but the protective, the amounts of wine which are safe is much less than, for instance, on cardiovascular mortality or on non-fatal events. A more recent study by Di Castelnuovo, recently published in Addiction, again shows that total mortality, cardiovascular mortality, other causes mortality show different but real J-curves, except cancer mortality. Here there is a little bit of a J-curve, but the confidence intervals clearly indicate that there is no protection at moderate alcohol consumption on cancer mortality. Another interesting data from this meta-analysis, including 16 different cohorts, 15 in Europe and 1 in Australia. This data is related to the French paradox. If we consider the total mortality in French and the Italian cohorts, the J-curve appears, but the window of protection is quite large, when we go to Germany, UK, Sweden, Finland, Norway, also there, the J-curve appears as moderate alcohol consumption, but the window is very strict. But even in Russia and Poland, there is a protection as moderate. The problem is that in these countries, moderate alcohol is rarely consumed. I met once a Russian colleague, and they told me that in Russia there is no J-curve. I can understand that if there is nothing, nobody drinking in moderation, obviously no J-curve can exist. We can also ask whether the amount of wine is the only problem important, or if drinking pattern, and especially the phenomenon of so-called binge drinking, should be considered. I show here a meta-analysis of Italian colleagues, and an example, take the example of 200 grams per week, which is a moderate amount. And if you are a regular drinker, you get advantage by this amount. But you are an irregular drinker. If you consume 200 grams per week only on Friday and Saturday night, not only you don't get any protection, but you have harm. So the same moderate amount of alcohol can have a completely different effects on our health in relation to the drinking pattern. This has been also observed in a study on which I will comment within few slides, showing that if you drink regularly, more than 2 days per week, you have a clear J curve. So this is a paper we shall see in a few moments, saying that there was no J curve. But in the supplementary material, the J curve was clearly present and obvious. And if you are a non-regular, occasional drinker, you see here that there is no J curve. Today, can we say that there are risk thresholds for wine or alcohol consumption? This famous paper published in the Lancet concluded that the risk threshold either did not exist or was very, very low. They showed that on all-cause mortality, there was no J curve. But on cardiovascular disease, the J curve was apparent. So there must be something to investigate in a deeper way. And with Simona Costanzo and Arne Astrup, we wrote a letter to the Lancet. Then we show that data from that paper, which were published in supplementary material, if you include in the figure the lifetime never drinkers and the former drinkers, the J curve is very apparent, very clear. So it depends, of course, if you start from people drinking moderate alcohol, you may have problems in the evidentiate a phenomenon which is very, very clear also in papers which apparently present data against the phenomenon of the J curve. Another paper published in the Lancet by the Global Burden of Disease study, taking into account not the total mortality, but putting together 23 different diseases and making one single curve by 23 different curves. They say in the paper that the level of consumption minimizing health loss is 0. And this in the lay press was 0 alcohol, tolerance 0. But in fact, if you look at their data, it's very clear that at least one drink per day does not make harm, but does not protect, but does not make harm. And I want to recall here what Hippocrates was saying, primum non nocere, the first thing that you must not provoke harm. And then if you get a benefit, okay, but it is completely different to say that perhaps alcohol has no protective effect on cancer, and saying that alcohol provokes cancer. Provokes is a verb which is used and even in the Lancet and the OMS, WHO documents, one could say that eventually that alcohol is associated with cancer, but not provokes cancer. Another question is whether benefits on cardiovascular risk by moderate consumption are counteracted by harms or on other endpoints, on other diseases. Here it is an example of stroke. When we consider total stroke, we find the usual J curve. And if we go to the ischemic stroke, the J curve is even more clear and more important. However, when we consider hemorrhagic stroke, we see that like on cancer curves, there is no protection. So we should always qualify our statements and very clearly the existence or the appearance of J curves, because there are situations in which this does not occurs. And another example is the atrial fibrillation. We could not show any beneficial effect of alcohol on atrial fibrillation, but well on the same population in heart failure. So when we have this negative data, we should emphasize this, because this supports that when we present positive data, they are true. As far as cancer is concerned, I show here another meta-analysis by the same Italian colleagues of Bagnardi, saying alcohol provokes cancer. Cancer is a known word, doesn't mean anything. There are many different types of cancer. And in this meta-analysis, you see that there may be oral cavity and pharynx of esophageal cancer, which might receive some harm, some increase of risk by moderate light alcohol drinking. But colon rectum here, there is no protection, but no harm, and also liver. So other types of cancer. We should always qualify the type of cancer, the type of disease on which we are speaking. For instance, a more recent meta-analysis of 16 different studies on the association of alcohol with colorectal cancer. A J curve appears even on colorectal cancer. So we must be prudent generalizing or making statements like dogma. Dogma do not exist anymore and should not exist in science. Are there opposite consequences of the problem I mentioned before of underreporting on cardiovascular protection or cancer risk? And the Klasky paper was already mentioned. You see here clearly that on risk of breast cancer, there are differences important among people who underreport alcohol. And you see here that there is a 1.5 risk. But the people who declare what they really drink, you see that there is no excess of drink. So the underreporting, especially on cancer studies, must be considered very carefully and can be important. Obviously, the contrary is true for cardiovascular disease. And this would explain why the J curve is larger, longer for a cardiovascular disease, because the protection may occur even at doses of alcohol larger than what is declared, what is reported. The conclusion of Klasky was that the apparent increased risk of cancer among light moderate drinks could be substantially due to underreporting of intake. And finally, in the last years, something appeared in the literature saying, finally, we shall put an end to the ingenious belief that wine or alcohol is beneficial against cardiovascular disease and total mortality, while confirming that it provokes cancer. And this is the Mendelian randomization. It sounds very good, Mendelian randomization. What is Mendelian randomization? The assumption is taking that the clinical outcome, for instance, mortality, related to alcohol consumption, is not measurable, cannot be studied by asking people how much they drink, in which way, which pattern, but measuring some polymorphism of proteins, enzymes related to, for instance, alcohol metabolism, let's say alcohol dehydrogenase. And if we randomize, because the polymorphisms are randomly distributed, this is randomization. Genetics, so if we compare people with a polymorphism associated with low or high alcohol consumption, and the other one as a control, and correlate the genetic polymorphism with the clinical outcome, we infer that the difference in genetic polymorphism is due to a difference in alcohol consumption. Of course, this is too simplistic. The genetic polymorphism should be very robustly associated with alcohol consumption, but alcohol consumption is not a drug. Taking a drug, perhaps Mendelian randomization can be more effective when studying drugs, but drinking wine is a cultural experience. Is not cannot be solely related to genetic predisposition to drink or not to drink alcohol. Muslims do not drink alcohol. There are religion, culture, environment. So it is very incredible to me that one can think that genetic polymorphisms can be as robustly associated with alcohol consumption. This is almost never true. And of course, the polymorphism should not be associated with any confounder involved in the relationship between alcohol and mortality. Now, let's see some example of what the Mendelian randomization studies produced. In this paper, a comparison was made of the same data, in the same cohorts, when observational analysis or Mendelian randomization analysis were performed. And we see that for breast and ovarian cancer, the observational, let's say the traditional analysis showed that there is a little risk for breast cancer, no risk and no advantage for ovarian cancer. But the Mendelian randomization show no risk for breast cancer and even small protection for ovarian cancer. So the genetically derived estimates unlikely have something to do with the outcome, in this case, breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Another example concludes, the time is expiring, no compelling evidence in support for a causal relationship, they don't say association, they say causal relationship between genetically predicted alcohol consumption and the risk of breast or ovarian cancer. So in fact, another recent study say we found no evidence supporting a relationship between alcohol consumption and overall or site-specific cancer risk. This is the famous UK Biobank study, so on about 500,000 people. This is a very important conclusion. So some time will pass before gold standard evidence will be obtained, but what can we say now? How can we conclude? The suggestion that's been made also by eminent colleagues that randomized clinical trials should be performed. I am a pharmacologist as education, and so I know very well the randomized clinical trials, but I think that these are good for drugs, not for alcohol or Mediterranean diet or other type of behavioral problems. It is very difficult. It has been suggested that short-term or pragmatic trials could be performed, but they will not resolve. And so the hope, many papers in these times conclude that these data are important, but they are observational. And so we are in need and we are expecting the results of a randomized clinical trial. Our friend Ken Mukamal still working to organize one of these trials to show whether moderate alcohol consumption would produce a clear evidence for the effect of moderate alcohol consumption on diabetes and cardiovascular disease. However, let me say a word against this love for randomized clinical trials. Let's imagine, well, what could we expect? That we control 100 people, the clinical trial, there will be many more, but 100 people, no wine consumer, and 100 people consuming low wine amount. After 1 year, we shall measure that the 10 events, 10% of events, fatal or non-fatal, and so 90 people will survive. Let's go to compare the other group of wine consumers. 10 people will have an event and 93 will survive. The paper will conclude that the relative risk reduction is 30%, so that the low wine consumption is shown by this randomized control trial that it produces a 30% reduction of in fact, out of 100 people consuming alcohol, only 3 got an advantage because 90 survived without wine, drinking wine. And so they should be included in this. The difference between 10 and 7 is 3, and 3 is presented as 30% reduction. So I think that we should not expect the truth and the gospel from randomized clinical trial. And since I mentioned gospel, let me conclude with a secular prayer. Lord, do not abandon us to temptation of excess drinking, but deliver us from randomized clinical trials. We believe, in fact, that the evidence from different approaches and study design, each with their own strengths and limitations, when combined, will result into the best available evidence. This is a conclusion I share with Ken Mukamal, and I will conclude here my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor De Gaetano, for this very interesting talk and update data. So it's wonderful to see so many elements concerning the debate. So it's time for question. So if you have question, you can put them in the little box that you have normally in your Zoom screen. It's put question and response in French, but question and answer, of course, in English. There is one first question from Martino Lorenzi, Professor De Gaetano. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, I see it.
Yes, and he's talking to you saying, grazie, Professor De Gaetano. Our group has data on the entire population of the city of Gubbio that we follow since 1983. Recently, we have published on nutrients data showing that people who drink in moderation have better eGFR and lower all-cause mortality independently of a large and of other risk factors. What will it take to stop the statement of GIMA and Lancet about extrapolation of the UK Biobank data to the world? This is
Thank you, Dr. Laurenzi. I know very well the Gubbio study, and I hope that your data, together with other data, will counteract the papers by lobbyists of anti-alcohol investigators and groups. I must say that to both papers published by the Lancet recently, they accepted 2 letters by our group. So at least there is the possibility to say something of critical evaluation. But unfortunately, this is the wine consumption and the alcohol consumption in general is no more a scientific problem. It is only an economical and especially political problem.
Okay, thank you, Professor De Gaetano. Another question from Dominique LANZMANN. You can.
Yes, good morning, Giovanni. I think to your slide about the J curve for the 3 countries, France, Germany, and Russia. Do you remember?
Yes.
And when I see these 3 curves, I think that leading drink in France is wine, in Germany it is beer, and in Russia it is vodka. That is why you have not the same, because the problem is to mix all the time alcohol and wine. It is not at all the same. For me, wine is a fruit juice, naturally enriched in polyphenols, and the results of the Nancy studies show that there is not the same relationship between wine consumption and mortality by cancer compared to beer and spirits. You see? And
yes, it is. You know, Dominique, that we published several papers comparing wine, beer, and spirits, and we think that since it is a political problem, it is important to show that alcohol is beneficial or is harmful. The figure published in Addiction shows very clearly that French, although the data are not directly on wine, but clearly shows that in countries where wine is the prevalent alcoholic drink, the J curve, as you mentioned.
Okay, maybe I have another question for both of you, for Giovanni and for Curtis, Professor ElLLISON. It's the point is, of course, the type of alcohol effect. This is a very important issue. So the type of alcohol count or not, because we consider that wine is not just another form of alcohol, because, for example, we have some phenol inside, and they can combine also with some of the compounds like acetaldehyde, that is well known for cancer purpose, for example. So can we expect that maybe some of the alcoholic beverages, and wine in particular, can be of interest because of their compounds? And do we have new data about this? Is there some advancement? Is there some work actually that was done concerning the different type of alcohol?
Kurt?
Yes, you need to reactivate your
the microphone.
Yes, the microphone.
Kurt, activate the microphone.
Yes.
Oh, tu peux pas lui mettre là? Tu peux pas le faire toi-même?
Non, mais si je le fais, qui le fait, ça passe. Alors.
Si tu appuies là, qu'est-ce que ça donne?
Can you try?
Yes.
Ah.
Okay, great. It doesn't work.
Alors, et si tu vas là, tu peux pas commander là?
Non, ça se fait pas là.
Réactiver.
Can you try here?
Super.
Maybe Giovanni, in this case, to begin, the times maybe that Kurt can arrive to do it.
In our experience, wine perform always better than other alcoholic drinks, especially the comparison is beer, because the consensus is large on the fact that spirits are not good. They should be considered apart from wine and beer. In some studies, wine and beer compared. In other studies, also in our hands, the protection by wine consumption was, let's say, 30% and was 18% with beer. So the performance was always better in wine drinkers in respect to drinkers of other alcoholic beverages.
Okay. We can wait to see if Kurt can come back. Another question here from Victor Freitas in Portugal. So Victor is asking, couldn't the lower rate of cardiovascular disease in France be associated with Mediterranean habits related to food consumption? Indeed, countries from the south of Europe have a lower cardiovascular disease problem compared to countries from the north of Europe. So finally, this is a point, wine, but also with complementary nutritional food, in fact. So
yes, I think that Ramón Estruc and Rosa Lamuela will say something about that. But also we have data showing very clearly that wine is an essential part of the Mediterranean diet. In our analysis, removing moderate wine consumption from the benefit of Mediterranean diet reduces by, let's say, 20% the benefit of Mediterranean diet. So wine is an essential part of Mediterranean style of eating.
Yeah, I fully agree with Giovanni. This is Ramón Estruc.
Okay, okay. Okay, thank you, Ramón. Maybe another point is concerning what you mentioned about randomization. Is there a possibility that in the future we can have a dictature? And I choose the word to be not politically correct because of the debate, that we can have a dictature of randomization results. Do you think that is there some need maybe to give explanation about the best way to do the work finally to advance on the project? Is randomization always the possibility or not? Should we put it outside is there some other type of possibilities that are really better? I know that it's a very important point for epidemiologists, I believe. So.
No, I think that if ethical committee or conditions will allow the performance of randomized clinical trials on wine or alcohol consumption, we will expect the results with interest. But my concern was against considering the randomized clinical trials as the only way to have the truth on the problem. During the COVID, the recent COVID, we had the data, observational data on the heparin effect, the beneficial effect. But they were, no, you cannot use heparin because there is no randomized clinical trial ever in COVID. But can you, this is applying dogma to situations in which dogma cannot be applied. Yeah. And it is difficult to perform a randomized clinical trials considering wine or alcohol as a drug. If you give 100 milligram aspirin per day to people with myocardial infarction, you can do that. And you evaluate all the rest, and it is always 100 milligram per day. But drinking or not drinking poses a number of complex problems that a randomized clinical trial performed with the methodology of drug pharmacology will not work.
Okay.
Je peux dire quelque chose?
Yes, last point.
Yes, Giovanni, we thought to that with Serge Renaud. Often we discuss the possibility of an intervention trial, and finally we found two possible models. Population with a high level of events. It could be in India, because in India there is a very high cardiovascular mortality, myocardial infarction. There is no religious problem, you see, because it can the religious problem can be you see what I want to say. And they know the wine, it is in Ayurveda, it exists, but they have not. We could have a real control group, you see. And finally, we discussed that with an Indian researcher, and he told us that the only problem we would have is a black market of the products. And the other model with a lot of events could be in a retirement house, elderly, in a closed environment, a lot of events, short, middle term study, you see. It could be possible to take two elderly house comparable and make an intervention in one and not in the other. You see, there are possibilities.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that we should close the discussion just for now to continue, to not be too late. And we can have questions after the other session. So the next topic now is more on the wine and health effect with biological properties. And so the first speaker is Professor Dominique DELMAS in Dijon. And so, Dominique, you can have the floor.
Mais pourquoi on n'a pas pu voir?
Okay, thank you, Pierre-Louis. You see my screen, it's okay for you?
It's perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizer, Jean-Claude, Pierre-Louis, and Raúl for this symposium to celebrate this birthday, the 30th birthday of the French paradox. And I am very happy to have the opportunity to present you this talk on wine polyphenol source with various impact on cellular mechanism. So as it has just been brilliantly explained, the French paradox is often associated with a moderate consumption of red wine as a part of Mediterranean type diet, where it seems that consumption of up to 2 wine glasses per day is associated with a reduction in coronary pathology, characteristic with this G curve, but also with a reduction in the relatively risk of developing colorectal cancer. This last aspect currently gives rise to many controversy because it goes against the public health policy, which is based on other epidemiological studies demonstrating the absence of protective effect of red wine consumption on the occurrence of colorectal cancer or breast cancer. In fact, where is the truth? In general, these studies are carried out in a rigorous way by trying to eliminate a certain number of confounding factors, which could give some error in the interpretation of results. So what to believe? The Romans did not think so well to say, using their famous Latin expression, in vino veritas, in the wine, the true. Indeed, the disparity of result from red wine consumption study could come from the wine itself and its composition in bioactive molecule. Indeed, wine is a complex mixture with a wide range of polyphenolic molecules that are usually divided in 2 classes. On the one hand, flavonoid, including flavanol, such as quercetin, flavanol that react together to give tannin, and anthocyanin, which come from the skin of black grapes. And on the other hand, the non-flavonoid, among which you find various phenolic acids, such as caffeic acid and gallic acid, but also stilbene, with the most emblematic of them, resveratrol. These polyphenolic compounds are often described as antioxidant molecules able to scavenge free radicals or to inhibit the enzyme responsible of their production, and that contribute to various pathological processes such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, inflammation, or degenerative processes. It is therefore easy to imagine that the total quantity of polyphenol present in a wine can influence its beneficial effect. Stress, whether biotic, such as infection by a pathogen, or abiotic, such as water stress, will influence this composition as well as the winemaking process. We have just been able to show in a study in partnership with a winemaker that maceration time influences the total polyphenol content. Indeed, from a red wine, Savigny-les-Beaunes, Premier Cru, with 3 different maceration times for 8 and 14 days, we have realized 3 dry extracts in order to determine the total polyphenol content. And you can observe on this graph that the increase in the polyphenol level coincides with the longest maceration time. Now, this high level of polyphenol is associated with an increase in biological activity. To answer this question, we first treated colon cancer cells with different red wine extract, and you can observe on this graph that the red wine extract with the highest polyphenol content here has the lowest concentration, allowing to inhibit 50% of the tumor cell proliferation, and is therefore the most active of the 3 extracts. This cell proliferation inhibition is also associated with an induction of cancer cell death by apoptosis, where again the extract number 3 induces the highest percentage of death. These effects are also found in vivo in animal models, where an oral supplementation with a red wine extract with the longest maceration times reduce the number of aberrant creep representing a precancerous state in the intestine after induction in rats by chemical compounds such as azoxymethan. This reduction will be then associated with an alteration of the different mechanisms involved in the process of carcinogenesis, such as cell cycle disruption and an apoptosis induction, but also with the mechanism involved in tumor invasion, such as the inhibition of tumor vascularization. In addition to the quantity of polyphenol, the qualitative composition could influence the biological activity. Indeed, a high-performance liquid chromatography analysis identify and quantify the wide variety of polyphenolic species, as you can see here on this analysis of Savigny-les-Beaunes from 2009. I have a problem with my computer.
Dominique, is it okay?
No, you hear me?
We can hear you, but we don't see maybe the evolution of the slide. I don't know. Can you change of slide or?
Yes, my okay. It's now. Yes. No.
We have no change.
I am. Je suis obligé de fermer le programme.
It's okay. You can close it and open it again. Your slide if you want. So sometimes the digital is not working as we would like.
You see now?
Now it's okay. It's
okay. So as expected, a combination of resveratrol and quercetin was synergistic to induce tumor cell death, but very surprisingly, addition of catechin to quercetin antagonize the latter's effects. Similarly, addition of catechin to the combination of resveratrol and quercetin did not induce synergistic effect, but an additive effect, again showing an antagonistic action of catechin. This result, also preliminary, is crucial because it could be a potential explanation concerning the disparity of the epidemiological study, which contradict each other, because finally, depending on the presence of the type of polyphenol, you can observe health effect due to their synergy, but also you can observe nothing because of the antagonistic action when some polyphenol are in the presence of each other. This synergy observed with red wine extract is not limited to the inhibition of tumor cell proliferation, but can be observed in other equally important physiopathological processes, such as inflammation. Inflammation, a process of the origin of many dysfunctions, is most often under the control of the cells of the immune system responsible for innate and adaptive immunity, where in particular, the T lymphocytes take part in the two processes and play a key role. Indeed, in an inflammatory and cancerous context, tumoral cells produce leading chemokine, leading to migration of specific immune cells, such as Th70 cells, from the differentiation of naive T cells responsible for the specific cellular immune response. Migration and stimulation of these immune Th70 cells then triggers the secretion of interleukin-17, responsible for chronic and acute inflammation, which will strongly contribute to various pathology and especially to tumoral growth. Firstly, in our laboratory, naive T cells were isolated from the lymph node and mouse spleen. Then they were differentiated in vitro in Th70 cells in the presence of a various concentration of red wine extract during 3 days. And finally, we determined the interleukin-17 associated pro-inflammatory Th17 by ELLLISON method. You can observe on this histogram that red wine extract strongly decrease in concentration-dependent manner interleukin-17 production as compared here to the control in black bear, where again, compared to resveratrol alone at 10 micromolar, the red wine extract at a concentration 500 lower produce a significantly better reduction. In the same manner, red wine extract strongly decrease the mRNA level of gene encoding this interleukin, as you can see here. We have also posed another question in relation with these degrees of interleukin-17, which was whether the extract could alter the process of lymphocyte differentiation. This process behind mainly under the control of a nuclear transcriptional factor, the protein ROR gamma T. And you can see on this immunoblotting that red wine extract is able to decrease this nuclear factor and therefore to alter the process of lymphocyte differentiation. But the ultimate question is whether the protective effect of this polyphenol involve the Th17 interleukin-17 system in an in vivo animals model. Firstly, we have demonstrated after administration of 100 milligram per kilo of red wine extract to mice with colon cancer that wine extract induce a significant reduction of this tumor infiltrating lymphocyte. This reduction is associated with the degrees of interleukin-17 measured by ELLLISON method in plasma level of mice treated with the polyphenol extract. And subsequently, the red wine extract decrease tumor growth, as you can see here with this red curve, leading an increase of the percentage of survival level, as you can visualize here in this second red curve. In conclusion, qualitative and quantitative composition in polyphenol of red wine extract modulate its biological effect. Some polyphenol act in synergize and other antagonize their effect. Red wine extract are able to prevent the appearance of paraneoplastic foci induced by a chemical carcinogen in rats, and they can act on several dysfunctional processes, such as inflammation through a modulation of the immune system. What's prospect? There is obviously a need to better understand the interaction between polyphenolic compounds present in wine. To study their bioavailability, we have been able to show in particular in previous studies that the presence of quercetin allowed a better intracellular penetration of resveratrol. What about other polyphenolic compounds? And will regular and moderate consumption of red wine allow the body to accumulate polyphenol in order to exert a subsequent action. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for my collaborator for this work.
Thank you very much, Dominique, for your nice presentation. We can continue with the next speaker, and we can have a question at the end of the session. So the next speaker is Professor Valérie SCHINI from the University of Strasbourg, and they are specialists of vasorelaxation, notably. So Valérie, you can have the floor.
Thank you, Pierre-Louis, for the introduction, and thank you, the organizing committee, to having invited us. I hope the slides show up nicely. What we want to give you today is our contribution to better understand the vasoprotective effect of grape-derived polyphenols, and we give you an overview what kind of research we have done the last 20 years, which have actually been initiated by Jean-Claude RUF at Strasbourg. And as we already heard very nicely today, that of course there are a lot of epidemiological studies, both prospective and case control studies, showing that intake of wine consumption is associated with a protective effect on the cardiovascular system. And this is, of course, also very important to lifestyle and associated with the Mediterranean diet. We already discussed it before by the previous speakers, that the Mediterranean diet is associated, as you can see here, 9% reduction of the mortality of cardiovascular diseases, and the contribution of moderate and responsible consumption of red wine plays an important role. And this beneficial effect on the cardiovascular system is mostly has a link to the intake of flavonoids. Here are the major categories of flavonoids. And you can see grape has a lot of flavin phenols, catechin, L-catechins, but also anthocyanins, giving the color to the grape, in particular the wet grape. And those are categories we are highly interested to better understand how such classes of compounds can actually impact our blood vessels. As you may know, in the cardiovascular system, we have in the lumen, the luminal layer here is a monolayer called endothelial cells. Here's a schematic, and they are the key players to regulate the cardiovascular function. And they do so mostly by three major mechanisms, protective mechanisms. The most important one is the formation of nitric oxide, produced by the enzyme nitric oxide synthase, and a strong inhibitor of local platelet activation and activation of the coagulation cascade, and also has strong vasodilator and inhibitor of numerous effects at the arterial wall. The other mechanism involved endothelium-dependent hyperpolarization, major role in the microcirculation and in large coronary arteries, and prostacyclin, which very often has only minor role. Nitric oxide, as I told you, is not only a potent vasodilator, but it also helps to keep your vascular smooth muscle in a quiescent state. You will prevent vascular remodeling. It also has a very important impact to prevent the development of atherothrombotic responses, like oxidation of LDL, expression of tissue factor, the activation of the coagulation cascade, and expression of adhesion molecule or chemoattractant molecules. So a very strong inhibitor to keep your arterial wall in a quiescent and protective state. Now we know since the last 20 years, since the discovery of nitric oxide at the beginning of the 80s, we know that there is a lot of different factors autocorrelate stimulating NO formation. The most important one is shear stress, producing a little bit NO, but all the time. This is the best way to protect your arterial wall. And what we now know since the last 10 years, that there are actually nutrition-derived factors. They are able to do exactly the same thing, to protect, to increase NO formation in a sustained manner, and of course, contribute to protect the cardiovascular system. And we'll show you some of those data. We were very lucky since the beginning of the year 2000 to be able to work on a red wine extract which was produced by the Ministry of Agriculture from Oliva and Viniflor. And this red wine extract was produced from a vin de Corbière here from the southwestern part of France. The wine contains 2.9 grams of polyphenols per liter. It was partially characterized. And we studied this red wine extract using isolated here porcine coronary arteries. They were pre-contracted either with an intact endothelium or without endothelium. We can mechanically very easily destroy this monolayer. And when we add the extract in increasing concentration, you can see that the ring with endothelium, full relaxation, whereas the ring without endothelium here at 3 times 10 to minus 2, almost no effect. And you can plot concentration-dependent relaxation to the red wine extract. And what was interesting to see that 50% of the relaxation was observed with a very low concentration of red wine polyphenols, 3 grams per milliliter. And this is actually a level you can find in the blood of a subject after drinking 1 glass of red wine as monomers. This is very important. Now, what other factors involved in this endothelium-dependent relaxation? You can see we inhibit nitric oxide synthase, we inhibit the relaxation, NO is involved, we inhibit the endothelium-dependent hyperpolarization response, significant reduction, we inhibit both NO and endothelium-dependent hyperplasia, no more relaxation. Which means that the red wine polyphenols are able to activate endothelial cells to stimulate NO and endothelium-dependent hyperpolarization. Then, of course, the question was always, yes, is it due to the maturation of wine, the fermentation, the contact with the old barrel? And that's why we were going further to study a grape skin extract, which was produced by Professor Roberto Soares de Moura from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And you can see full concentration dependent, endothelium-dependent relaxation. We further went to identify whether or not the grape is important, the type of grape you use, and we tested different grape juices. And here are data with Concord grape juice, and you can see also full concentration dependent relaxation, which means the food at the beginning has a very important role for this activity. We also are able to show that in cultured endothelial cells, when you activate endothelial cells with a physiological stimulator of endoformation, bradykinin, you can see a more than twofold increase of endoformation. And actually, when you expose the cells to the red wine polyphenol extract, you also see twofold increase, which means red wine polyphenols are as important to stimulate the endothelial formation nitric oxide as physiological endogen activators. And we also look for different sources, and you can see here in the curve, those are concentration-dependent relaxation curve. In red, in the free curves, you can see the Concord grape juice induced relaxation, and you are able to see that actually some products had very little activity, some had some activity, and actually here are 5 products which have even more activity than the grape juice. And it was very surprising to us because they all have high levels of polyphenol, around 2 to 3 grams per liter, which means it's not because you have high levels of polyphenol that you will have biological activity. It depends on the quality of your natural products. And we then further with quite a lot of work to identify, to characterize how actually those products are able to activate endothelial cells. And you can see the red wine polyphenols, but also the grape, the ammonia, the blackcurrant, and the blueberry anthocyanins activate endothelial cells, surprisingly, by causing an increased formation of oxidative stress in those endothelial cells to trigger activation pathway. And the major activation pathway is the SARC PI3 kinase AKT pathway, which phosphorylates eNOS at an activator site, leading to sustained NO formation. We also are able to show that the same pathway via PI3 kinase, the MAP kinase pathway, upregulates endothelial NO expression. So you have more NO synthase expression, a higher level of the protein, which also is associated with a sustained formation of NO. And the sustained formation of NO is actually the optimal mechanism to protect in an efficient manner your cardiovascular system. It's a similar effect as that observed in response to shear stress. But this is a major important point. Of course, as pharmacologists, for us, it is important to evaluate in vivo what are the potential protective effects of polyphenols on the cardiovascular system in a more integrated system in vivo. And we tested several of those different pathologies which are well known to be associated very early on with endothelial dysfunction. But there was also a physiological condition. Physiological aging is associated with the appearance of endothelial dysfunction, which will promote the development of cardiovascular disease. And that's why we were interested to test the potential of red wine polyphenol to improve aging-related endothelial dysfunction. For this purpose, we did a curative approach. We studied 1-year-old rats, which were given red wine polyphenols, 100 milligrams per kilogram per day in the drinking water for 4 weeks. And we studied later on the endothelial function. And you can see that the middle-aged animal, 50-week-old rats, you can see that endothelium-dependent relaxation, this is the NO component. We isolated them by doing the study with indomethacin, inhibitor of cytokinase, and camptothecin apamine, inhibitor of the endothelium-dependent hyperpolarization. You can see that the old rat had a very poor relaxation compared to the young 12-week-old healthy rat. Now, providing for 4 weeks red wine polyphenols in the drinking water to this middle-aged rat, you can see this was able to significantly improve the endothelium-dependent relaxation. That means we are able, just by giving iron polyphenols in the drinking water, to improve the endothelium-dependent relaxation, the endothelial function. And you can see here what's happening at the arterial wall level. You can see that the middle-aged animal has a high level of oxidative stress indicated to this by this wet staining, which is a dihydroetidium staining, redox-sensitive probe compared to the young animal. We are able to see an upregulation of the endothelial enosyntase in the middle-aged animal compared to the young. And this is mostly explained by the fact that superoxide anions will react with nitric oxide to form peroxynitrite. That means the NO is degraded in the old animal. And as a compensatory mechanism, the system will upregulate enos to try to maintain vascular homeostasis. Now look what's happening when you provide red wine polyphenols in those middle-aged rats. You can see that the signals now in the middle-aged animal are similar to what we see in the young animal. Very interesting. We then were also interested to see what's happening if we give a low dose of red wine polyphenols in the drinking water to young animals, 16-week-old, those are very young rats, and we provide very low doses, 25 milligrams or 75 milligrams per kilo per day, all the time in the drinking bottle up to 14 weeks of age. What's happening? The 40-week-old rat also showed an endothelial dysfunction. These are the white open circles. Remember, the 12-week young one had 100% relaxation. Now see, giving 25 very low dose of polyphenols, 25 milligrams per kilo, all the time in the drinking water was associated with a significant improvement. That means you are able to retard, to delay the aging-related endothelial dysfunction. Very interesting. Now, lately we are interested, we know that the cardiovascular system, depending where you look in the cardiovascular system, the endothelial cells have a very different phenotype. And actually in the cardiovascular system, we have arterial sites which are more at risk than the other ones. And you can see here in the coronary circulation, arterial sites at risk are mostly localized at the bifurcation. This is where arteriosclerotic plaques develop. Now, why to develop there at the bifurcations or at the curvature? This is due to the fact that at those places, special places, we have a disturbed flow, low shear stress, inflammatory response, compared to the thoracic aorta where we have steady laminar flow, high shear stress. Now, what is so special at those areas here? You can see here the inner curvature, we have disturbed flow. Here you have the inner curvature. When you open the aortic arch, you can see that here you have blue cells are stained in blue. This is due to the fact that endothelial cells became senescent, old, premature aging of endothelial cells. Here is the outer curvature. Here we have high shear, now endothelial senescence. And where you have senescent endothelial cells, you have expression of markers of endothelial cell activation, like VCAM, additional molecules. And this endothelial cell senescence is very important for the future because senescent endothelial cells promote endothelial dysfunction. Endothelial senescence is induced by oxidative stress. Here you have different cardiovascular disease, different inducers of premature endothelial senescence. You can see the blue stain, those are senescent endothelial cells compared to healthy cells. And this, the major phenotype changes in the senescent endothelial cells is an increased expression of senescence-associated beta-galactosidase activity and expression of small proteins P16, P53, P21, which are inhibitors of the cell cycle. That means endothelial cells are unable to regenerate, and they have a huge impairment of the cellular homeostasis, oxidative stress, enos go down, you have a poor atherothrombotic state, and develop endothelial dysfunction. And you can see here, when you overexpress P53, a mark of endothelial cells, only in endothelial cells, here you can see an endothelial cells in blue stained expression P53, you can see that the aortic ring, where you overexpress P53 in endothelial cells, they show endothelial dysfunction. Less relaxation compared to the control aortic ring. And you can see that those cells, those tissues also produce less NO. That means senescence will promote endothelial dysfunction and the development of cardiovascular disease. And that's why we are lately highly interested to see whether or not polyphenols, red wine polyphenols, but also anthocyanins are able to improve the induction of, to prevent the induction of endothelial cell senescence. And here we developed two models of endothelial senescence, replicative model just by passages. You can see P3, passage-free endothelial cells have much higher level of senescence-associated beta-galactosidase activity than the P1 healthy endothelial cells. And you can see addition of blackcurrant extract, this is non-cyanin-rich extract, is able to decrease the level of endothelial senescence. And again, we see this effect at very low concentration, 1 to 3 microgram per ml. And also here's another model, which is premature induction of endothelial cell senescence, exposing cells to angiotensin II. Oxidative stress is the trigger to increase senescence in those endothelial cells. And again, we see low concentration of anthocyanins, 3 microgram per milliliter or 10 microgram per liter, very effective inhibitor. And you can see the expression of the senescence markers upregulated by angiotensin II, P53, P21, P16, and you can see treatment with 10 microgram per ml of blackcurrant extract is highly effective to prevent the induction of senescence. And I would like to conclude here that when wine of polyphenols and particularly anthocyanin molecules are extremely interesting to protect the cardiovascular system. They have different effects. I showed you only some of the effects we have observed. They activate endothelial cells to promote increased formation of NO and endothelium-dependent hyperpolarization. This, of course, will promote vasodilatation, will help to prevent the induction of endothelial senescence and keep your arteries in a healthy condition. And importantly, they also inhibit the high level of oxidative stress we see associated with cardiovascular risk factors, in part by inhibiting the local angiotensin system, decreased expression, activation of the angiotensin system, and inhibition and decreased expression of the major source of oxidative stress in the artery wall, NADPH oxidase, which of course will decrease pro-atherothrombotic responses. This, of course, makes anthocyanin and red wine polyphenol extremely interesting to prevent this premature alteration of the cardiovascular system, induction of senescence, endothelial cell senescence, preventing endothelial dysfunction, and of course, healthy vascular aging. And to conclude, here is our team at the Strasbourg University, and thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much, Valérie, for your talk. So maybe we have time for a few questions if there is. I have one question, Valérie,
Yes.
concerning, in fact, what is finally the best compound or the best player? That's one of the questions, because I remember that in some of the work we did in the past, for example, the addition of some tannins and some anthocyanin act better than the tannin alone or than the anthocyanin alone, for example, on the vasorelaxation, for example. So do you have some sets, some experimental data? Do you have, I don't know, element about it?
Yeah, of course, this is a very important point, but it is a very difficult point to answer experimentally, because of course, when you work with tannins and procyanidins, it gets complicated. So with Cyril Auger, we fractioned the red wine extract to see where is the activity. And we were actually very surprised that the activity was associated with a lot of different fractions and a lot of different compounds. So in nature, there is redundancy. We have different molecules being able to induce the same activation of the endothelial cells, which may be a good thing, because from one year to the next, of course, the composition may change, but in a global biological activity still remains the same. And we also note this with the Concord grape juice. We tested 4 years in a row, different batches, of course, and the activity was very similar, although most likely the composition was not the same. And to identify active compounds, we are currently looking at the anthocyanins because it's a little bit more easier to work. And it seems that the conjugation the type of sugar conjugation is very important for the activity. And we're able to see that, for example, glucoside, anthocyanins seem to be interesting targets on this point. And we try to elucidate what's the role of the sugar being conjugated to the anthocyanin, and it seems that they may help the anthocyanins to target onto T cells and to get the inside on the T cells to be most likely generate activate the activator pathway.
Okay, thank you very much. Interesting answer. Is there some other question from the panelists or from the audience? No, I don't see some other. Maybe another comment, Valérie. It's concerning also the senescence that you were talking about. So finally, some of these phenol delayed. We can say that it delayed the senescence, and well. How much time can we expect for, well, probably depend of the type of cell, of course, but do we have an idea about the time we can win at the cellular level?
Again, of course, it's always very difficult to transpose cellular or ex vivo data to an in vivo situation, and from an animal model to a human being. This is not so easy. But what we know is on the T cells are highly sensitive to oxidative stress. And once you have oxidative stress, the pathological pathway is induced, leading to premature senescence. This expression of the senescence markers, proteins, the cells, they stay there, but they're unable to regenerate. And this, of course, is a problem for your cardiovascular system. And this mechanism is actually present at sites at risk at a very early stage. Now that is premature senescence at bifurcations, at curvature, it has been detected already in children before 10 years of age, which means we all have this premature arterial sites at which, and then of course it depends on your lifestyle. If you have, of course, diabetes, high levels of cholesterol, you will just stimulate the development of this premature senescence area for the development of plaques. So I think it's very important for very early on to have a very equilibrated diet, a diet rich in food, in vegetables, and of course for adults, maybe one glass of red wine can be optimal to contribute. And this is something very important to let people know, that it starts early at childhood. It's not something late.
Okay, thank you. There is a last question from Patrick Horst in Champagne. He is asking if the experiment were done, in fact, with some increasing level concentration of ethanol, in fact, added with anthocyanin, for example. So,
yes, this is an important question. Of course, if you want to have an idea about impact of wine consumption, again, we were more interested in the phenol, in the flavonoid contribution to protect the cardiovascular system. So our studies are done without ethanol.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Valérie. And so congratulations. And so we can continue with talk of, I think, Raúl Pastor. Jean-Claude, I give you the floor.
Yes, I can share the video from Raúl Pastor. So Raúl Pastor is a medical doctor of the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and he's a researcher on wine and health and specialized in resveratrol. So I share my screen.
Buenos días a todos. Quiero antes que nada agradecer el patrocinio de este simposio a la Organización Internacional de la Viña y el Vino, a sus autoridades, al director general, Pau Roca, a las universidades de Bordeaux y Buenos Aires, al Enoviti Internacional y al Instituto de Ciencias de la Vid y el Vino, y muy especialmente a los profesores Pierre-Louis TEISSEDRE y Jean-Claude RUF por la excelente organización y programa, y a los disertantes por su gran predisposición. También mi reconocimiento a quienes nos precedieron desde 2017 como organizadores locales de la Paradoja Francesa. Al profesor Roberto Iermoli de la Universidad de Buenos Aires, al profesor Mario Groverman de la Universidad Abierta Interamericana, a los profesores Aníbal y Pablo Manfredi de la Universidad de la República Uruguay y a la profesora Ana Rodríguez Mateos del King College London en Reino Unido. Me referiré a las contribuciones del resveratrol en la salud humana. Este polifenol es probablemente el más investigado en el grupo. Podríamos afirmar que la vida humana transcurre en tres grandes fases. La primera en salud, hasta la segunda o tercera década. Luego sigue una etapa saludable con parámetros de preenfermedad y por último una fase de enfermedades crónicas. Actualmente la longevidad humana es de aproximadamente 30.000 días. En los últimos 56 años aumentó 11 años. Aproximadamente casi 2 años por década. Sin embargo, este aumento se produjo a expensas del mantenimiento de las enfermedades por efecto de los mejores tratamientos de las patologías crónicas. Pese a este beneficio, las enfermedades se relacionan con un deterioro de la calidad de vida y altos costos para la salud de las personas y las familias. El envejecimiento, entonces, es un factor de riesgo de enfermedades crónicas no transmisibles reconocido actualmente por la OMS y su prevención es uno de los retos de la investigación más importantes de nuestro tiempo, cuyo principal objetivo es vivir más años con salud y menos con enfermedades crónicas. Como ustedes pueden ver, la longevidad humana actual está reducida en un 54% cuando la comparamos con la esperanza de vida genética, que estaría en torno a los 122 años. No hay enfermedades sin envejecimiento, ni envejecimiento sin enfermedades. El envejecimiento es en forma genérica la declinación de las funciones vitales que condicionan el desarrollo de las enfermedades crónicas. Todos envejecemos a velocidades diferentes. También ocurre así en los distintos órganos del cuerpo, que se deterioran a velocidades distintas según el concepto de uso y desgaste. Por lo que podríamos decir que el envejecimiento es un proceso que transcurre entre la acumulación de daños del metabolismo y la capacidad de resiliencia o recuperación. El daño metabólico oxidativo, la disminución de las defensas antioxidantes y el aumento de las respuestas inflamatorias son tres procesos primarios de la biología molecular interrelacionados que deterioran constantemente la función de los órganos. Dentro de la complejidad del envejecimiento, el estrés oxidativo aparece como una condición excluyente, ya que no es imaginable el envejecimiento sin estrés oxidativo. El muy elevado poder antioxidante total del vino, comparado con otras bebidas o infusiones, ubica esta matriz como la mejor para reducir el estrés oxidativo y restablecer las vías de señalización del metabolismo. Acompañar las comidas con vino tinto podría ser una de las mejores medidas de prevención. De los 11 grupos de polifenoles del vino, 5 de ellos son flavonoides y 6 no flavonoides. El resveratrol es un polifenol no flavonoide que se encuentra en la clase de los estilbenos. Según la base de datos de Phenol Explorer, encontramos cantidades muy pequeñas que pueden estar en promedio en más o menos en 1.48 miligramos por cada 100 mililitros de vino tinto. En 2015 nos propusimos probar si el resveratrol pudiera ser una alternativa eficaz para reemplazar en la vinificación el uso del anhidrido sulfuroso. Logramos una vinificación exitosa. Conseguimos parámetros similares en 3 microvinificaciones simultáneas. La primera fue la vinificación tradicional, luego una vinificación sin agregado de metabisulfito de potasio con 150 miligramos de resveratrol por litro, y la tercera microvinificación también sin metabisulfito de potasio y agregando 300 miligramos por litro de resveratrol. En forma paralela, investigamos las notas de cata realizadas por revisores independientes y fueron similares en los 3 tipos de vinificación. En este ensayo, llevado a cabo en perros, ya que es un modelo ideal de envejecimiento acelerado, comprobamos los beneficios preventivos del resveratrol sobre los daños del envejecimiento. Demostramos, por ejemplo, que la suplementación con resveratrol reduce el estrés oxidativo, la pérdida del músculo esquelético, la pérdida de la masa ósea y el daño sobre el ADN. En 2020 publicamos en Nutrients un trabajo llevado en voluntarios con síndrome metabólico. Este síndrome se caracteriza por la presencia de enfermedades crónicas como obesidad, diabetes, hipertensión arterial y alteraciones del perfil lipídico. Tiene tasas aproximadamente del 45% de prevalencia en la población general y conlleva un estado inflamatorio crónico y un elevado estrés oxidativo. Demostramos en este trabajo la disminución muy significativa de la inflamación sistémica crónica, en principio en el espacio intracelular, medido por la ferritina plasmática y la PCR también plasmática. Y también en el espacio intravascular demostramos la disminución de la inflamación medida por el consumo de oxígeno en polimorfonucleares. Por ello considero que el resveratrol es uno de los candidatos más atractivos para enriquecer el vino y probar distintos beneficios en el consumidor y en el vino. Actualmente estamos conduciendo un ensayo clínico en donde enriquecemos con 150 miligramos por litro de resveratrol al vino terminado y medimos distintos parámetros de la salud humana. A modo de resumen y conclusiones, el envejecimiento es un proceso universal y altamente personalizado de disminución de las funciones vitales en el que todos parecemos envejecer a ritmos diferentes. El envejecimiento es fácil de acelerar, difícil de frenar o revertir. El resveratrol se presenta como uno de los mejores principios activos para enriquecer el vino y así reducir el estrés oxidativo, reducir la inflamación y aumentar las defensas antioxidantes. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Okay, so thank you, Jean-Claude, and thank you, Raúl, for the presentation concerning resveratrol. It's true that resveratrol is one of the phenol, probably the one who has more work and paper actually. And so we can talk about it after maybe the talk of the last part of the symposium. wine in the nutrition and healthy style with the first speaker, that is Professor Ramón from Barcelona. So Ramón is a medical doctor and a professor at the hospital of Barcelona. So Ramón, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre-Louis, for the invitation. We were to talk together with Rosa Lamuela, because we have shared a lot of research, and we want to conduct the first part of the talk, and Rosa will share with me the comments in the second part. So may you put the first slide, Rosa?
Can you see it?
Yes.
No?
Yes, perfect.
Ramón, do you see it?
Okay, the next one, please.
This one?
Yeah, this is the title, no?
Ah,
Yes.
sorry, I go.
You have to put the full screen, please, Rosa.
Do you see it now?
No.
A ver. Es que,
Your slide, can you put them in full screen?
yeah, I think I have in full screen. One moment. Sorry.
No.
Espera. One moment. Do you see this?
Yeah, now, yes.
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are going to talk on wine. It is very important to put the wine in the perfect umbrella that is Mediterranean diet. So we want to share our experience on wine, Mediterranean diet, and health, mainly cardiovascular disease and a bit of cancer. Next slide, please, Rosa. You can see in the literature there is a lot of papers are in favor of alcoholic beverage and others are against alcoholic beverage. And that's because we are now here to try to know what are true in this topic. What happened with alcohol, what happened with wine, what happened with Mediterranean diet. In this paper published in Circulation from the group of Harvard, you can see that the lifestyle, the main lifestyle factors that can influence in life expectancy are no smoking, to have a low body mass index, to follow Mediterranean diet, or to follow a healthy diet, because it was performed in the States, so it's not closely to Mediterranean diet, to practice exercise, and also to drink moderately alcohol, between 5 to 15 grams a day. If you don't have nothing of these healthy lifestyle factors, you smoke, are obese, etc. If you are a woman, you will die if you are 50 in 29 years. But if you follow the 5 factors, even in drinking alcohol, you will die at 83 years. So it's a big difference in life expectancy if you follow these lifetime factors, including a moderate alcohol consumption, that if you don't follow these lifestyle factors. Next slide, please. However, you know that, and Professor De Gaetano told of this, there are another papers that against alcohol, and this is a very famous paper on Lancet, that he observed that the risk of mortality from all causes, especially from cancer, increases when consumption level are below 0. So the best consumption you have to recognize, to recommend to to population is to drink 0. So it's absolutely absolutely another message to the population. You can drink moderately, or you have to drink 0. Next slide, please. However, if you look the figures of this paper, you can see that even in ischemic heart disease, they follow a G-shaped curve. So moderate drinking and this is all type of alcohol may protect against cardiovascular disease. Next slide. However, it has been shown for other speakers, when you look for breast cancer, the figures increase after the first drop of alcohol. So the recommendation in women who can have breast cancer is not to drink absolutely nothing. However, in this kind of studies that is based in population studies and with different methods to register alcohol consumption, there is many problems. And you can see here in the next slide that in the same paper, if you start to drink alcohol, you start to increase the incidence of tuberculosis. So something is wrong in this kind of studies, and we have to improve our methods to register alcohol intake in order to be sure, because tuberculosis, you know, is an infectious disease, and not have maybe the people who drink a lot of alcoholism, so have a higher incidence of tuberculosis, but in moderate drinking doesn't matter relation with tuberculosis. Next slide, please. And in any ways, when you see what could be the causes of disease, alcohol use or abuse is in the list, so we have to be aware of on alcohol. But if you go to the first line, the main risk factor for disease, dietary risk. So we have to first to look for what you eat and also what you drink, but not also what you are drinking. So we believe that dietary pattern is most important than the amount of alcohol you can consume. Next slide, please. In this sense, we are really true that alcohol has two phases. One is a positive phase and another is a negative phase. And we know what is the negative phase when working in a hospital. Is plenty of alcoholics in the hospital. Next slide. And you can see here that depending of the level of consumption, you can have a low risk of problem with alcoholism, a risk problem drinking, etc. So we have to be aware that the increased consumption of alcohol can be bad for your health, and we always, as a medical doctor, we have to be aware of this. Next slide. In this sense, when we analyze the variables of alcohol consumption and health, you have to analyze the pattern of consumption. It's very different if you drink in a daily basis or the weekend. It's also important the type of beverage. It's important the dose, the daily dose, the weekly dose, and also the lifetime of alcohol intake. It's also important the dietary pattern, and it's also important the lifestyle. Next slide, please. So you can be in a risk drinker and alcohol abusers, or to be an alcoholic, depending of the intake, but also we have to take into account the lifestyle. I will try to explain in the next slides. Next slide. So some years ago, maybe 20 years ago, we analyzed the toxic effect of alcohol on cardiovascular system, and we observed that it's an acute effects and chronic effects. An acute effect is the holiday heart syndrome, ventricular dysfunction, arterial hypertension, sudden death, and also there could be the possibility of chronic effects that the main in cardiovascular disease is the dilated myocardiopathy that we call alcoholic cardiomyopathy. Next slide. And when we analyze all type of problem with alcohol, and this is a very old slide that we give alcohol, a huge amount of alcohol in a control person, it's a healthy person, an alcoholic without cardiovascular disease and an alcoholic of cardiovascular disease, and you can see here the arrhythmias, and you can see the number of ectopic beats was clearly related with the peak of the alcohol in blood. So alcohol may produce arrhythmia in all the possibilities. Next slide, please. We also observe that alcoholics has a lower ejection fraction. Ejection fraction is a measure of the cardiac function, the main measure of cardiac function, and we compare to alcoholics. So alcohol in high doses it's harmful for the head. This is not doubt in this sense. Next slide. And we saw in this paper published many years ago that was a very, very significant correlation between the lifetime dose of ethanol consumed and ejection fraction. So if you consume a lot of alcohol, plus 25 kilograms of alcohol by kilogram of body weight, you have a higher probability to have a low ejection fraction, so to have a cardiac an alcoholic cardiomyopathy. Next slide, please. However, we were surprised of this when we analyze around 100 alcoholics with alcoholic cardiomyopathy, so he has a heart damage by alcohol, and some people became abstinent, so they drink zero, they increase the ejection fraction, so these lesions of alcohol on the heart are reversible and can improve and to be quite normal. If you continue to drink, the ejection fraction goes down, and the probability of death is very, very high. But if you are in the moderate consumption, in this case was a very high moderate consumption, was 20 to 60 grams a day of alcohol, was the same improvement in ejection fraction than we saw in the alcoholics that became abstinent. So we realized that even in the worst scenario, that is alcoholic cardiomyopathy, if you reduce alcohol to a moderate consumption, you may improve your health. So we realize in this moment that alcohol is not so bad for your health if you drink moderately, and this is the key of the film. So to drink moderately. Next slide, please. In this sense, we tried to analyze what could be the positive phase of alcohol, and it's important to underline moderate alcohol consumption and to underline twice moderate. And we were also interested to know if there are different effects, depending of the type of alcohol, if wine or alcohol-rich last gin and so on. Next slide, please. We were aware that it is a dose relationship between alcohol and different outcomes, like breast cancer or liver cirrhosis and so on. But we tried to move in the right position that is moderate, because there are several, and Giovanni has talked on this, the several studies concluding that moderate alcohol consumption reduce overall mortality. That is the best outcome we can measure. Next slide. But it's also important the pattern of drinking, and this old paper of the risk of a stroke in a large amount of male health professionals. If you drink 3-4 times a week, is better than to drink more than 5. So it's important the pattern of drinking, not only the amount, the pattern of drinking. You have to be at least in this when we analyze a stroke. Next slide, please. However, if you only focus on myocardial infarction, if you eat a lot, you will reduce even more the probability of myocardial infarction. So we have to be in the right position in to reduce cardiovascular disease like myocardial infarction, and to reduce other important outcomes like a stroke, cancer, and so on. So we have to be clear that cardiovascular disease goes in different direction than the others, but you have to analyze the overall health status, like overall mortality and so on. Next slide. And when we try to differentiate, is the type of alcohol is important. This is a paper from Mukala, Amal and colleagues that they said that doesn't matter the type of alcohol you are consuming, because the effect are attributed to the ethanol as a molecule. But you can see here in this paper that people who drinks red wine has a lower risk of myocardial infarction than people who drinks white wine or beer. So something is in the alcoholic beverage, that has explained here, polyphenols and so on, that maybe red wine is better than the other alcoholic beverage. Next slide, please. And this is a very known paper that compared wine drinkers and non-wine drinkers, that was beer drinkers and spirits, and the effects on total mortality was lower when you drink wine, when you drink compared to the other alcoholic beverage. Next slide. Next slide. Next. And it's important. Yeah. And we believe that wine and beer maybe is better than spirits, and this was a comparison of the cardiovascular risk of wine that may reduce by 32%, of beer that will reduce a low figure that 22%. Both beverage reduce cardiovascular risk, but wine may be better than beer. And in this paper, next slide, please, that was published by the group of De Gaetano, you can see that here the curve of the wine and beer was quite the same. And we believe that because here include wine as red wine and as white wine, and also beer. So it's important to differentiate the type of wine you are drinking when you have to talk on wine and cardiovascular health. It's, for a point of view, very different, red wine from white wine, and beer is just in the middle of the both wines. Next slide, please. So this is important to know the data we have from epidemiological data, but we now have to go to mechanisms just to know better what could be the effects of alcohol, wine, beer on health. So, and you can see here the possible mechanisms, that's changes in the lipid profile, like increase HDL and reduce oxidation of ATL, changes in the endothelium, changes in insulin sensitivity, and also changes in gut microbiota. And also it's important to have been explained by other speakers that the importance of thrombosis, like platelets and clot formation of fibrinolytic system in the prevention of myocardial infarction and also stroke. Next slide. So next slide. We have to analyze what could be the oxidative effect, antioxidant effect of wine. And you can see here in this very old paper, but interesting paper, that the oxidation of LDL was higher when the inhibition of oxidation of the LDL was higher when the LDL was included in diluted wine compared to vitamin E or quercetin. So wine really is better than vitamins and also than polyphenols when we analyze as a whole. Next slide. And this is another study that was performed in animals looking for atherosclerosis. You can see here that non-alcoholic wine was in the right, regular wine was in the middle, and a control. You can see here that the amount of fat in the aorta was lower when the animals drink wine compared to non-alcoholized wine. So in this sense, alcohol plus bioactive compounds like polyphenols and so on is better against atherosclerosis than the same amounts without alcohol. Next slide. So we try from several years to know what could be the best effects. The effects came from ethanol, came from phenolic compounds. That we was interested on this topic. Next slide. And we analyze in the PREDIMED, and we'll talk on the PREDIMED later. We include 7,500 participants divided in the three groups. Next slide. Next slide. And when we analyze the total amount of polyphenols, you can see that mortality, the overall mortality, is absolutely lower when compared to people who eat a high amount of polyphenols, a medium amount of polyphenol, or in red, the people with low amount of polyphenols. So in our experience, and Rosa, you can talk now a little on this, polyphenols help to reduce mortality or to increase longevity.
Well, I would like to point out here that when we look which were the foods that were giving these polyphenols, red wine has a big effect on that. Moreover, when we analyze specific polyphenols, especially, for example, in this case, stilbenes, or for example, hydroxybenzoics, the main source of these compounds that they were also affecting the mortality were coming also from wine. Also, there was amount that was coming from olive oil, but here the polyphenols from red wine were having a big effect on this, on mortality.
Okay, we tried to look in a crossover clinical trials to analyze what could be the effect of wine or as a polyphenol-rich alcoholic beverage compared to as a polyphenol-poor alcoholic beverage that was gin, and so was a crossover. So genetic factor was the same because it was the same subject who have to drink the both interventions, wine or gin, with a washout period. And these studies were first performed with Giovani De Gaetano in a very old European grant that was the start of our career in this issue. Next slide. And we look for mechanisms of inflammation, and we analyze in lymphocytes and monocytes adhesion molecules and chemokines, and this is the list of the chemokines and adhesion molecules what we analyze. Next slide. And you can, yeah, so this is how the leukocyte go to it has adhered to the endothelium and go inside the arterial wall in order to start the procession of arteriosclerosis. Next slide. In this sense, we saw that in the left hand is alcohol minus polyphenols, that was gin, and in the right was alcohol plus polyphenols, that was red wine. What was 1 month intervention of 30 grams of alcohol as gin, of alcohol as red wine in healthy individuals. And you can see here was a decrease only when in these adhesion molecules in T lymphocytes and monocytes when the people drinks red wine, in difference to the gin. Next slide. We also analyze in this part, we compare cava as a white wine versus gin, and also white wine has an anti-inflammatory effects in several inflammatory markers. But you can here there was some inflammatory marker that decrease when the people, this man drinks gin, and when the people drinks cava. So in this sense, alcohol by itself also have an anti-inflammatory effect. But when you drink an alcohol plus polyphenols in a little amount of polyphenols, it's enough, like cava, they reduce a higher increase of adhesion molecules and other inflammatory markers. Next slide.
Ramón, one moment. I would like here to point out, because there is always the question if white wine has an effect, no? Because like as has been pointed out before, no, red wine has much more polyphenols. And I think this slide is important to show also that probably the effect is smaller, but there is also an inflammatory effect on also consuming white wine or cava in that case. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks, Rosa. And this is analyzed. We analyze some oxidative stress parameters, and we measure malondialdehyde, the lifetime oxidase LDL and LDL peroxidase, and you can see here that after gin there was a small increase in some of these parameters, but when the people drinks alcohol plus polyphenols, that's red wine, was an increase in lag time, in the lag phase time. Also is the time to start oxidation of LDL, and also was another markers of oxidative stress. So we also in our experience also that red wine has also an anti-inflammatory and in this case antioxidant effect on humans. Next slide, please. And we try to analyze the adhesion capacity of the monocytes of these subjects. And you can see here, after stimulating with TNF-alpha, the cellular line, there was a reduction of the adhesion after the intake, the consumption of gin by 39%. It was in the left side of the slide, and in the right side you can see after red wine was really a high reduction in the addition of these cells in this endothelial line. So really it was a reduction in the capacity of these cells to adhere to these cell lines. Next slide. This is, you can see here the slide at baseline after stimulation with the monocytes with TNF alpha and the endothelium with TNF alpha was an increase in the addition of the monocytes and lymphocytes after washout. It was a reduction of this adherence after gin and a higher reduction of addition after red wine, and you can see here in the figure. So it's a demonstration that it's a low of adhesion molecules in the monocytes and lymphocytes, and also a lower capacity of addition of these cells to the endothelium. Next slide. And we also try to analyze what happened with the alcoholized red wine. And so we compared the effects of red wine, the same wine without alcohol, and gin in a crossover design. So it was quite the same type of study we have performed, but with 3 interventions: red wine, the alcoholized red wine, and gin. You can see here that the different. Next slide, please. So it was a decrease in some cytokines that was the same after red wine and gin. So like an increase in interleukin 11 and a decrease in monocyte-derived chemokine. So we have to attribute these effects, these healthy effects, to the alcohol, because it was the same in the red wine and the gin. Next slide. And when we analyze another adhesion molecules like ICAM1 or interleukin 6 or interleukin 1 alpha, was a decrease only after red wine and the alcoholized red wine. So we have to attribute these effects to the polyphenolic compounds of wine. So some effects, health effects, are due to alcohol, and other effects are due to the polyphenols and other bioactive compounds of wine. Next slide. Next slide. We also saw changes in insulin sensitivity, and also an increased lipid profile. And in this case of HDL, this effect was due to the alcohol, because it was similar in red wine than gin, and insulin sensitivity was also similar in both, so we have to be attributed to alcohol and also in polyphenols. Next slide. Next slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also analyzed the blood pressure and also the nitric oxide as a measurement of the vasodilatation of the arteries. Next slide. It was a decrease after the blood systolic blood pressure after red wine, but more than the alcoholized red wine. And the systolic blood pressure was only decreased after the alcoholized intervention with the alcoholized red wine, and the significant increase in nitric oxide was observed after the intervention with the alcoholized red wine. Thus, in this case, alcohol has a pressure effect that can be counteracted by the polyphenols. But if you drink an alcoholized red wine that is in alcohol without a wine without alcohol, you will decrease more the blood pressure by an increase nitric oxide. Next slide. And was was a significant correlation between the changes in blood pressure and also the changes in the nitric oxide. So we have to attribute these effects to the reduction of blood pressure to an increase of nitric oxides, mainly due to the polyphenols of red wine, but not to alcohol, because in alcohol in gin was some attempts to increase. Next slide. But we have to put the wine in the right context, like Mediterranean diet, and we have analyzed, next slide, the effects of a Mediterranean intervention. It was next slide, and another one. Yeah, that was to analyze what happened in 7,547 participants. That was divided in the 3 groups: Mediterranean diet plus olive oil, Mediterranean diet plus nuts, and a low-fat diet. Next slide. And some people drink wine, and some drinks beer. So we can analyze the effects also in these participants, the effects of wine and beer. And next slide. This is the cardiovascular death, myocardial infarction, and stroke. That's a hard endpoints that we measure in the Predimed. Next slide. And this is the main results of the Predimed. It was a significant 30% reduction in the group of Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil plus nuts compared to the control. Next slide. But when we analyze what happened with beer and wine, we saw that was a decrease in beer drinkers and also in wine drinkers in total mortality. But when we analyze cardiovascular event, was really a decrease, especially after wine. So wine really works against cardiovascular disease, and you can see here, as many you drink, this is a lower cardiovascular events in our study. Next slide. We also analyze what happened with the different types of wine. This is wine in total, white wine, vino blanco, and red wine. And you can see here that the effects was especially when the consumption was within less than 15, was higher than people who drinks between 15 and 70. It's a high amount, but it was a significant reduction, but especially when the people drinks red wine. Next slide. We also compared the old red wine and young red wine, and we has a better effects when the people drinks a young red wine. We think because, and Rosa, you can explain on this, of polyphenols and the aging of wine.
Yes, well, but before somebody has said that it was the same because there was the tannins that increase. However, really in a young wine, you see more polyphenols, no? And when you age it, they polymerize and you have less polyphenols, no? Because they oxidize. For this reason, we think that this effect is happening in the Predimed.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
So, but we believe that the challenge we have now is to try to analyze what happened with alcohol and cancer. Next slide. You know that alcohol may produce at least 7 types of cancer by different mechanisms that it's written in the slide, mainly breast in women and bowel in men and women. Next slide. And when we try to analyze in different meta-analyses, at least in women, if you drink a lot, the probability to develop a breast cancer is higher than if you drink less. But also, if you drink a liter of alcohol, you may increase the risk of breast cancer. And this is now the key of the questions. Next slide, please. So we believe that perhaps these studies are not the best that we can perform. There's a lot of pitfalls in this kind of studies. You know, this one is the error of register, what we call underreporting. So some women especially don't say the truth when they report the consumption of alcohol and wine, and this is because some people who drinks a lot may be included as a moderate drinkers. It will be one of the causes of these results. Next slide. So we have seen that maybe it's a common methodological problems. One is the underreporting, that is very important in this type of studies. Another is the mixed effects. So we have to differentiate what is low to moderate, what is high. It's important also to differentiate the types of alcoholic, and several studies do not differentiate if the people, women or men, drinks wine, mainly beer or spirits. But also very, very important is the pattern of consumption. This is very different if you drink 7 drinks a week, but it's very different if you drink 1 drink a day, so 7 drinks a week, that you drink 7 drinks in the same day, that is binge drinking. So the effects on the body are absolutely different, and in breast cancer is absolutely different. So binge drinking is demonstrated in several studies that increase the incidence of breast cancer. But what happened with moderate drinking, we have to analyze better this issue. Next slide. And also it's very important the context in you put the wine. So it's very different you drink wine in a healthy diet or also in a healthy lifestyle than if you put drink wine in this sense. Next slide, please. So in the PREDIMED, we have to analyze also the relationship between Mediterranean diet on incidence of cancer, especially in breast cancer. Next slide. And we saw that in the group of Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil, and some women drinks wine, most of them, because was one of the recommendations or our intervention, has a lower incidence of breast cancer compared to the control diet. So in this sense, we believe that polyphenols of wine, polyphenols of olive oil counteract the effects of alcohol, and the final result is a reduction compared to the control group than have no intervention on Mediterranean diet. So diet is really important in the incidence of cancer, breast cancer, and Mediterranean diet include wine. Next slide, please.
Yes, this slide is only to show, it's a recent publication that we have performed. It's only to show that these were phenolics from extra virgin olive oil, but that we have seen that they arrive to the breast, and they arrive also to the well, in mothers that are in gestation, they also arrive to the newborns. So it's important on the diet, but we have put this slide like to show that in that case, in the extra virgin olive oil, there was a reduction on breast cancer, because really the phenolics of extra virgin olive oil can arrive to the breast of the woman, no, can have an effect on the breast.
So you can see here also, when we compared people who drinks wine, you can see the nothing or a little, moderately or higher, and was the differences in cancer death was different if the people follow Mediterranean diet or the control diet. Other causes of death also, but in cancer death, you can see if you drink wine in the Mediterranean diet, you will reduce the incidence of the mortality due to cancer. But if you drink wine but don't follow a healthy diet, a Mediterranean diet, you increase. It's a very high increase in cancer death. And so this show that really you have to put wine in the right context, the Mediterranean diet, and dietary pattern is also very, very important in the final effect of wine on cancer. If you put wine in the Mediterranean diet, you decrease the incidence of cancer death, but if you put in another unhealthy diets, you will increase. And also this can explain also some of the results we have observed in the literature in the relationship between alcohol and cancer. There's some protects and some not. So it's very important the diet that has been followed by the participants in the studies. Next slide. And this is an old paper that was published by the group of Harvard. You can see here that the incidence of cancer depends on the intake of folates. So in this paper that was demonstrated really that, or demonstrated was shown that total folate can counteract the effects of alcohol in the relationship between women and the risk of breast cancer. So this is one element, folates, but we believe that the overall diet has a higher effect in this protection. It was a reduction, even the people drinks moderately alcohol. Next slide. And so our main conclusion is you have to put the wine in the right context, like that is the Mediterranean diet pyramid, in order to reduce mortality, to reduce cardiovascular disease, and to reduce cancer, neurodegenerative disease, etc. So as a conclusions, we have to look what happened with alcohol intake, but in the society, in the population. But we have to know that the final effect of the alcohol intake will depend on the amount of alcohol consumed, and we need a very close register of the amount of alcohol consumed. And now with Rosa are trying to assess the registers of the food frequency questionnaires by analyzing biomarkers of wine consumption. No, Rosa?
Yes, we have. Well, we are looking tartaric acid as consumer of wine, red or white. It doesn't matter because tartaric acid is present in both. And in the case of red wine, we are also looking for resveratrol as biomarker in urine.
So in order to know what is the amount, because we believe that it's different the effects, especially in cancer, if you drink wine, beer, or spirits, it's important the pattern of consumption, and to avoid the binge drinking is also very important the dietary pattern, and we have to recommend to follow a Mediterranean diet that includes a moderate consumption of wine. And always, and Giovanni knows that we need really clinical studies, randomized clinical studies, in order to answer all the questions and to demonstrate that really this is really truth with a high scientific evidence trials like randomized clinical trials. Thank you for my part, and Rosa will close the speech.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I am not sharing now. I am not sharing the slides now. Ramón?
Yeah.
So with that, we would finish, no? With these conclusions.
Okay, thank you very much, Ramón and Rosa. So Rosa, you have no other slide? It's okay?
No. This
okay.
we did both together.
Combine both of them. Okay. Thank you very much. So I have one question for you, and maybe there is also some question from the audience. But I have heard often Serge, our friend Serge Renaud, Professor Renaud, telling us that if we want to see an effect with polyphenol, they need to be in alcohol or in fat. Right. Often he was saying that. So what is the story about this? Is it necessary really that the phenol to be really active should be in alcohol or should be in fat?
Well, we have done studies in the case of fat with tomato, with fat or without fat, and tomato polyphenols absorption. And really, when there is fat, there is an increase in bioavailability, bioaccessibility, and bioavailability of polyphenols. And the same tomato prepared by ourselves, yes, you are right, there is an increase. However, I think that this was very important, especially when we were looking the absorption of these polyphenols. But nowadays we are looking a lot how they arrive to the microbiota and the polyphenols that are generated by the microbiota. And in that case, I think that fat is also important. However, we believe that polyphenols from the microbiota because, for example, now we are observing that in urine, they are in more amount and in blood than the original phenol. So I think this can be true, but if it was totally true, for example, in the case of red wine without ethanol, we would have not observed an effect, and we observe an effect without ethanol. So there is an effect. However, I think in that case, microbiota, and when we did that study, well, in that case, we did not measure the microbiota phenols and the microbiota. However, I think that we have to consider the effect of microbiota. In any case, I agree that ethanol or fat has an important effect on the bioavailability. I totally agree with you.
Okay, thank you. And what about the quality of the fat? Because, of course, in terms of fatty acid, for example, you have some of the fatty acid that can be oxidized quicker than some other. Is it better to have in this nutrition fatty acid finally, or the fat with more powerful action to fight against oxidation? For example, fatty acids that you can have in, I don't know, in nuts, in olive oil, or in special type of product, maybe?
I totally agree with you. I totally agree that, for example, fat gets oxidated when you cook with it or when it's in the intestine, no? It gets oxidated. So if you have, for example, virgin olive oil, that it also contains polyphenols and is rich in MUFA, in monounsaturated fatty acids, you have more protection than if you are using fat that can be easily oxidized. Totally agree with you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. As a question, maybe, I don't know, is there from the audience Jean-Claude or Raúl, Dominique? Or from the panelists, is there some question? And also the audience, is there a question for Ramón and Rosa?
I think everybody's hungry.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Cats and wine.
They want to experiment probably and to see how they can manage the glass of wine and the food. Okay, so well, it was only my two questions. I don't know, Dominique, you have maybe something to say before?
Is there too much thing to say?
Do you believe that we need more study concerning nutrition, including wine, to have a better understanding about what is happening in terms of nutritional and physiological effect, especially in the frame of cardiovascular disease?
I totally agree. But the problem that I think that you have, well, Ramón here can say more, but I think that you have pointed out previously that nowadays, for example, this is happening in Europe, in the Spanish government, that they don't give any money at all to do research on wine. And I think, well, it's a pity, because if you don't have research, you cannot demonstrate anything, no? So I totally agree with you. However, I don't know how we can perform this research if nobody is giving, because the only way then would be through food frequency questionnaires or using biomarkers in studies that we have urines or whatever, no? But we cannot realize a randomized clinical trial or whatever. What do you think, Ramón?
No, yeah, I agree that we need studies on interactions of alcohol as red wine and another alcohols, and also fat, like unsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, and clinical outcomes. So I agree with the question that polyphenols may increase the absorption, maybe also changing in the microbiota, etc. But it's an interaction. So we need this, because I believe it's a synergy, not only an addition of the effects, a synergism, and we should analyze in depth these synergisms of wine and polyphenols of wine, polyphenol olive oil, and polyphenols from fruits and vegetables, because we believe if you drink alcohol, maybe you favor the absorption of the polyphenols of other foods like vegetables, so on, as olive oil. Maybe the fat of olive oil increase the absorption of the polyphenols of vegetables. So that's because we believe that in a mix, and also it's important the way of cooking and so on, and we finalize in a Mediterranean diet style of life.
Okay, there is one more question from Raúl Pastor. He's asking what is a better MUFA for increase the biodisponibility of polyphenol from wine?
I don't know if anyone has performed this study. I don't know, but well, when we talk about MUFA, we usually refer about oleic acid. However, I don't know if there is any group that has done research with different MUFAs and see which was the effect. I don't know if somebody has done this study.
Okay. There is another question from Victor Freitas. How can we give this message that wine can be a healthier actor for consumer? This is for you and maybe also the other colleagues.
Yeah. How can we give the message that? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. Well, the problem is that I think that science demonstrates that a moderate and regular consumption with food is healthy. But as Ramón has pointed out now, is that red wine probably is increasing the absorption of other phenols present in vegetables or fruits. However, the problem is that they don't allow us to say anything or any message. No, I think that now it's like gas ethanol and it's forbidden. No, so
I think that the best way to communicate to the society the benefits of red wine or wine is to perform high quality studies, and the journalists take the message and put this study have demonstrated this, because you cannot recommend, but you can show the results of a study. So Rosa told on the financial problems we have for these studies, but you have to fight in this direction to perform more studies. Studies now, very interesting, the studies of resveratrol and aging, because all the people wants to be young, so maybe this can arrive to the society. So I agree that we have to communicate, and the only way to communicate is to put in the performance the results of clinical studies, because we cannot give our opinion on TV and so on, but explain the results of the studies.
Okay, maybe one comment and question also for all of you, and maybe also more particularly to Kurt ElLLISON. I think that he can speak now. Just a point concerning, in fact, the place of wine in the nutrition. Should we be more active to, especially at political level, to have a recognition of wine in the diet? Because finally, especially in Europa, because, and of course outside Europa, because from an history point of view, wine was in the diet finally in Europa for a long time now. And so it has also developed in a lot of country now. But should we have to act to have the wine more recognized as a part, in fact, of the diet in correct amount, correct quantity, good way, I will say. So should we be more proactive about this? Kurt, what do you think about it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes. I think, well, first I have a question. Do you think that all of these crazy anti-alcohol papers that are coming out saying that there's no benefit from wine, do you think it's having much of an impression on the drinking habits of our people? I'm not sure. I'm just wondering.
I agree with you, of course, I agree.
Because I don't think people drink for their health. You know, they drink because they like the effects and they enjoy it, and it improves things. So I've been so upset by seeing these really poor papers coming out with big promises that if you stop drinking alcohol, you'll do better and all that. I just think all we need to do is just continue to come out with good balanced papers to kind of counteract that. But I'm not sure that they're having the effect they think. I don't think people have stopped drinking because of somebody says that no alcohol is better. But I agree, just more and better papers. And I think that things like our forum, if we can get it active again, I'm not getting much input right now, but if we get it active, we can respond to those in a more balanced way, but not a knee-jerk condemnation of every paper that comes out like that. But there are a lot of papers coming out that are very annoying. But all we can do is just keep doing good work and publishing it.
Okay, so that's, thank you, Kurt. Is there some other comment?
No, that's I enjoyed hearing a lot about things I don't know much about. I don't know my polyphenols as well as I should, but I definitely feel that wine should definitely be separated from all alcohol. And I think any paper that all it talks about all alcohol, I just kind of think we should forget that and look for something that gives you separate results of wine with food, in a good pattern, and not mix it with alcohol. People don't drink alcohol; they drink beer, wine, or spirits. So let's talk about what happens when you drink wine.
Probably, yes. The natural product of wine is very unique, and so finally, the extraction that is done during the winemaking is probably enough to bring us regularly some compounds of interest. So if we can have wine with not so many quantity of alcohol, because this last decade we have also an increase in the amount of alcohol also in wine. Some wines that were in the past maybe at 12% volume are now maybe in 14 or sometimes 15. So if we can arrive to have a better balance is also probably nice. But we need to really think that wine should be a part of the diet. And especially of this Mediterranean model diet. So that's a very important issue there. And for political people, more particularly, every country probably should think about have some politics, some rule or a regulation about it. A better place for the wine in the nutrition is a very important issue also.
Good. Write papers do research about wine, not about alcohol.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Is some other comment? I see one more question. There is one person, it's Valérie. Valérie is asking, is seedless grape berries the right way to go for the future for healthy diet? Who want to answer? Rosa or Ramón?
Well, I think that berries are well. I guess that here I'm talking. Well, there are white and grape on red, no, but red berries now they are very well related because of the anthocyanins, with especially its decrease in diabetes and metabolic syndrome. So I think this is a very important food. But I think that most important thing is to talk about a healthy pattern, no? It's important to include berries, it's important to include virgin olive oil, it's important to include red wine, no? I think the important is more than one food that is all you have that to have all you eat a healthy pattern, then you, I think, like Mediterranean diet or whatever, then it's what you feel really, it's not only berries, no? I think berries are very interesting, but not only this food, no?
But I think that's right, but I think that if the people are looking for effect, so they should take probably berries with seeds, because in seeds we know that there is a lot of tannin generally inside. So that's of course a point here. Okay, is there some other comment or question?
I think, Pierre-Louis, that one should insist on the quality of diet and the quality of wine, because say that the Mediterranean diet is good or that wine is good is not enough. We should qualify the quality of the products. For instance, we have seen that if people follow Mediterranean diet but consuming ultra-processed food belonging to the Mediterranean diet scheme, you don't get any benefit. You go worse. And so we should insist on the fact that the good wine is consumed in moderation. And it is a moment of pleasure, meditation, or whatever you want. It is not, we should insist on the quality. Otherwise, we sell drugs.
Yes, you are right, Giovanni. I think that we should try to have a fresh glass of wine, cook ourselves. And so if we are able to enjoy the glass of wine because it gives some pleasure, so probably all of that is probably a good way to have a better effect, or to have a potential effect probably. And so maybe we have also to work. This is a lifestyle also, and so this is also maybe one of the conclusion of this webinar, is that to say that we need also to advance on a lifestyle where we are able to include the product, qualitative product, and that to be actor, we need to be actor, player of the in this field, in fact. So that's also probably one of the key points here.
Maybe if you agree, I can follow up on this, because of course, as a consumer, it's very important to get food of quality, which is a big problem for the consumer. And I can show you some evidence we got. We went to the supermarket between France and Germany, and we bought 57 different food juices to see what is the quality of the food juice from the shelf, from the supermarket. And out of these 57 food juices, only 4 showed beautiful biological activity, 3, 4 in between, and the other one had a flat line.
Yeah.
Nothing interesting in those juices. And this is something as a consumer, I think it would be worthwhile to have a way to get more information about the quality of the food you buy.
Yeah,
this is important for this Mediterranean diet. I think we need products of quality.
So maybe we should go also through index with active compounds, the quality of active compounds in some of the food, maybe. Actually, we have the Nutri-Score that is A, B, C, D, E for a big or a low intake of calories, but this is probably not enough. This is one point. And we need also some substance of interest that are not taken into account there. And so maybe probably we have to act also for something new about it. That's also a key point here, probably, for all food. Thank you. There is one comment from Jose Manfredi. The Sun study of the Mediterranean pattern of alcohol consumption brings us the opportunity to show to the people if they have a safe or a dangerous pattern of alcohol consumption. Do you think so? Who want to comment?
Per sicurezza mica può mettermi una firma qua. Dice Rosaria che non è sicuro.
Giovanni or
no, thank you.
Okay.
I enjoyed very much this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ramón, do you want to answer maybe?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree.
Okay. 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 I don't know if there is some other comment, but if there is not, I think it's time to say thank you to everybody, because we have already been a little bit longer. So Jean-Claude, I think that we have to thank all the panelists, all the professors and colleagues that were talking for this webinar. So all of you, thank you very much. We have to thank also the IV for the support and for the organization. Also, of course, our colleague from Buenos Aires and from Innoviti International. And of course, all the persons that were able to join us for this birthday of the 30 French paradox publication in the Lancet from Serge Renaud. And so we can imagine maybe to have some opportunity to have a new webinar on these different topics to make our community more active and to be generating more network about this topic. And we hope also that we can have more funding in the future to be able to work on the topic. This is also a very important issue. So thank you to all, and I think that we can say bye-bye. I don't know if Jean-Claude, you want to say something?
No, thank you. It's a pleasure also to meet everybody and to update the new research, and we can see what's happened in the future.
Okay, thank you very much to all, and now it's time to close.
Bye-bye, Kurt.
And bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. And so we will put in replay the video of the meeting for sure.
Thank you to all.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Raúl.
Congrats.
Ciao.
Congrats.
Ciao.
Bye-bye to all.
Congrats.
Thank you to all.
Thanks.
J'ai pas vu.